What if the gods were never myths, but memories? What if the faces carved into ancient stone were not symbols of faith, but records of those who once descended through the smoke of creation? Across deserts and drowned continents, humanity left whispers of beings who walked among them, luminous, immense, and strangely human. They were called the Watchers, the Anunnaki, the Sky Beings, and somewhere, buried beneath dust and denial, their traces remain. Tonight, we drift into the silence between what was remembered and what was erased, into the rift where history trembles, half dream, half revelation. Take a breath. Let the centuries slow, and if you're still awake, stay with me. The story begins now. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy stories that drift between dream and history. And if you're still awake, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is. They say every civilization begins with a promise, and ends with a silence. But what if that silence is not the end, only a pause? A veil placed carefully over something too vast, too luminous, for the next age to see. When the first archaeologists brushed dust from the stones of Mesopotamia, they expected to find legends. Instead, they found memory carved into clay. Tablets older than language as we know it, written in wedge-shaped marks that told of gods who ruled before kings, of beings who descended from the sky to establish order among men. In the ruins of Nippur and Uruk, in the fragments of the Enuma Elish, there are traces of a forgotten chronology, one that speaks of a time when gods walked the earth not as spirits, but as administrators, astronomers, engineers. They were called Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens. Some dismiss it as myth. Others, like Zecharia Sitchin in the late 20th century, argued that the Sumerian tablets were not metaphor at all, but a record of real events, that these beings arrived from a hidden world, a wandering planet or a higher realm, and seeded the beginnings of civilization. His theory was ridiculed, but the clay does not laugh. It simply endures, whispering the same strange names again and again: Enki, Enlil, Ninmah, beings who created humankind as helpers, then regretted what they had made. It is here perhaps that the fracture begins, because in every ancient myth, from Sumer to Egypt, from the high Andes to the sands of Sinai, there is a moment when the gods withdraw. They vanish not through death, but through decision, as if some cosmic law demanded distance between creator and creation. The flood stories, the exiles, the plagues, they all mark a boundary drawn between worlds. In the Book of Enoch, written centuries later and hidden from the Bible for almost 2,000 years, there is another name for these beings, the Watchers. They were said to have descended on Mount Hermon, not to rule, but to observe. Yet, as Enoch writes, they became enamored with the daughters of men, and what followed was chaos, a mingling of worlds that broke divine order. For their transgression, they were cast into the depths, bound until the end of days. But Enoch also speaks of something stranger, that their knowledge, astronomy, metallurgy, the secrets of writing and number, was passed to mankind before they fell. If one listens carefully, the same cadence echoes across time. In the Greek myths, the Titan Prometheus brings fire to humanity and suffers for it. In Egyptian lore, Thoth gifts language and reckoning of the stars. In the Vedas, beings called the Devas and Asuras wage wars in the heavens, while humankind learns from their ruins. Different tongues, same rhythm, knowledge descending, punishment following, silence thereafter. What if all these stories are fragments of a single memory, a prehistoric event replayed in the language of symbol? Archaeology, in its restraint, calls it diffusion of myth. Yet the diffusion seems to have crossed oceans long before seafaring civilizations existed. How could the Maya and the Sumerians both align their temples to the Pleiades? How could flood myths emerge in every corner of the planet describing the same dark deluge, the same beings of light, who warned a chosen few to build refuge before the waters rose? Perhaps the answer lies not in distance, but in recurrence, in cycles so immense that we no longer perceive them. Ancient traditions from the Andes to the Indus speak of world ages, each ending with a cleansing: fire, water, wind, or ice. Between each age, knowledge is lost, only to return when humanity is ready again. Could the Watchers then be less a species than a pattern? A consciousness that reappears when memory fails? Modern scholars trace these tales to the dawn of writing, around 3200 BCE, yet the Sumerians themselves claimed they inherited their knowledge from an earlier race, the Ubaidians, whose temples still lie buried beneath Eridu's sands. There, excavations reveal layers upon layers of civilization, each built atop another, as though the earth itself were trying to remember its previous dreams, and in one of those layers a tiny artifact, a clay figurine with large almond eyes and elongated skull, lies staring upward, its expression neither human nor beast. The museum label calls it Unknown Deity, circa 5000 BCE. But what if it was a portrait? Each generation assumes it is the first to awaken, yet every broken tablet, every buried city tells us the same thing. We have awakened many times before. Between those awakenings, something intervenes, a flood, a fire, a silence, as if the story is rewritten with the same pen over and over. In the late 19th century, British explorers like Austen Henry Layard and Hormuzd Rassam uncovered libraries of cuneiform tablets in Nineveh and Ashur. Among them was one text older than Genesis, the Epic of Gilgamesh. There, the hero meets Utnapishtim, survivor of the Great Flood, granted immortality by the gods. Yet Utnapishtim tells him a secret. The gods once gathered to destroy mankind, but one of them warned me. A warning, a pattern, a memory of a fall and a preservation. The same chord, played across millennia. Could it be that these stories were not primitive fantasies, but encoded records of encounters, moments when human and something other shared the same horizon? If so, the silence that follows would make sense, for to encounter the divine is to risk dissolution, the mind protecting itself by turning awe into allegory. Still, fragments remain. The Watchers, the Anunnaki, the architects of the first ziggurats. They linger in myth, in architecture, in symbols whose meanings we pretend to have forgotten. Even the stars bear their marks. Astronomers have found that many ancient sites, from Giza to Teotihuacan to Angkor, align with Orion's belt, as if the heavens themselves were used as a memory map, a celestial archive of where they came from. But who were they really? Beings of flesh and light? Survivors of an earlier world? Or projections of a deeper consciousness? The universe's way of remembering itself through us? The desert wind still moves over the ruins of Ur. The tablets still whisper beneath museum glass. And in their quiet lines, one can almost hear a question trembling at the edge of time. Did we make the gods? Or did the gods make us? In the deep hours before dawn, when even the stars seem to pause, there is a question that lingers. Why do all the oldest memories of mankind begin with something that fell from the sky? The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki descending in fire and wind. The Dogon of Mali spoke of beings from Sirius who taught them the secrets of the cosmos. The Hopi told of the Kachinas, who came down from the heavens to guide humanity through cycles of destruction and rebirth. Different continents, different ages, yet the same direction of origin, upward. In the British Museum, a single clay cylinder bears the name of Gudea of Lagash, who claimed that the god Ningirsu came to him in a dream, showing him the design for a temple, as it is in heaven. The architecture of ziggurats, built in layers of diminishing squares, mirrored the cosmic mountains described in the Enuma Elish, a stairway not for mortals to climb, but for gods to descend. Why build heaven downward unless one remembered a time when heaven once touched earth? The same pattern repeats in Egypt, where the pyramids, aligned perfectly with Orion's belt, were said to be copies of the imperishable stars. The ancient texts call them mounds of creation, where the gods first stepped from the waters of chaos. In Mesoamerica, the temples of Teotihuacan follow the same stellar geometry. There too the builders called it the city where men become gods, and yet no one knows who built it. The Aztecs arrived centuries later and found the city abandoned. They said the gods had made it before the last sun was born. Across these ancient sites, the geometry is almost identical, the same angular precision, the same alignment to solstices and star clusters that no simple agrarian society should have known. How did these civilizations, separated by oceans and millennia, all measure the same sky with such impossible accuracy. When mainstream archaeology calls it coincidence, it feels like an evasion, because coincidence cannot explain intent. Perhaps it was not the physical descent of gods that each culture remembered, but a transmission, a spark of something divine, impressed upon human consciousness like an ancient code. The Watchers, as described in the Book of Enoch, were not only beings of light, they were teachers. They revealed metallurgy, astronomy, writing, and even the art of enchantment. They became, in a sense, the architects of knowledge itself, but every gift came with consequence, for knowledge untethered from wisdom becomes corruption. In the Genesis narrative, humanity is warned against eating from the tree of knowledge. In Enoch's version, the forbidden fruit is not literal, it is the teaching of forbidden arts. The sin of the Watchers is not lust but education, and in the punishment of the Watchers, one hears an echo of something deeper, a fear of human awakening. The gods, or those who claim divinity, sought to preserve their distance. There is an unsettling symmetry in this. Each time knowledge descends, catastrophe follows. Fire reigns, floods rise, civilizations vanish. Could it be that our own progress follows the same pattern? That the moment we reach too high, something intervenes, not from cruelty, but from cosmic preservation, like a parent pulling fire from a child's hand. In 1945, when the first atomic bomb was tested in the New Mexico desert, the physicist Robert Oppenheimer quoted the Bhagavad Gita. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." But he also said something less known. When asked if the test was the first nuclear explosion in history, he replied quietly, "Yes, in modern history." His words, half jest, half revelation, imply a suspicion too uncomfortable to explore, that the cycle of knowledge and destruction may not be new, only remembered. In 1979, an archaeologist in southern India discovered a layer of vitrified rock, stone fused into glass by heat exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. Local legends called the site the city cursed by the gods. Similar glassy ruins appear in Scotland, Turkey, and the Middle East. Science calls them products of ancient warfare, yet no known weapon of the era could have generated such heat. Unless the myths are right, that once, long ago, the sky itself burned. If the Watchers were real, then perhaps they were not celestial angels, but remnants of a civilization that mastered technologies we have only begun to rediscover. Could they have been survivors of an earlier cycle, Atlanteans, Lemurians, or something even older, who rose again among primitive humans to guide, teach, and warn? But if they were teachers, where did they go? Every myth agrees, they vanished, leaving humanity to stumble in the dark. The flood, the fall, the destruction of Babel, all moments when the link between heaven and earth was severed. And yet, small clues remain, stone maps, undeciphered languages, anomalies that defy chronology. The Antikythera mechanism found beneath the Aegean Sea, built with gears so precise that it predicts celestial movements with modern accuracy. The Baghdad battery, capable of generating current 2,000 years before electricity was discovered. Perhaps these are not anomalies at all, but residuals, echoes of a forgotten epoch. Every civilization leaves behind a shadow, the memory of something greater that preceded it. Maybe the Watchers did not fall, maybe they withdrew, maybe the silence of the gods is not absence but observation, watching whether we, their pupils, would remember the lessons or repeat the same mistakes. Look at us now, again reaching for the heavens, again building towers that touch the clouds, again splitting atoms and rearranging genes. Are we ascending or reenacting? The night sky, after all, has seen this before, and somewhere beyond the Pleiades, beyond Orion's frozen light, perhaps the Watchers still gaze back, waiting for the day humanity remembers what it once was. Perhaps when we finally look up not in fear but in recognition, the silence will break. But until then, the stars will keep their counsel, and the earth will continue to whisper, "We have been here before." There is a peculiar loneliness in our search for origins. The deeper we dig, the more we find not clarity, but echo, as though the earth remembers, but refuses to speak in full sentences. Beneath each layer of soil lies another story, another silence, And perhaps nowhere is that silence heavier than beneath the sands of southeastern Turkey, in the stones of Göbekli Tepe. Discovered in the 1990s by Klaus Schmidt, the site overturned everything we thought we knew about civilization. 12,000 years old, twice the age of Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, it stands as a paradox. Carved pillars weighing up to 16 tons, arranged in precise circles, adorned with reliefs of scorpions, lions, vultures, and celestial symbols. Yet the people of that age were supposed to be hunter-gatherers, with no writing, no metal, no agriculture. So who built Göbekli Tepe? And why was it deliberately buried around 8000 BCE, as if hidden from a future unworthy to remember? Schmidt once remarked, "This is no temple built by farmers. This is the work of minds we do not yet understand." The pillars themselves seem to hum with geometry, not random but patterned according to alignments that suggest an early form of astronomy. Several enclosures face Sirius, the same star revered by the Dogon and the Egyptians. Coincidence, again, becomes uncomfortable. Some researchers propose that Göbekli Tepe marks the transition between eras, the bridge between the memory of the gods and the awakening of man. A place built not for worship, but remembrance. Perhaps the first monument to memory itself. If so, then what were its builders remembering? Ancient myths from Anatolia speak of beings who descended during the time before the Great Cold, luminous teachers who restored the sky after a cataclysm. The flood had not yet come, but the world was still trembling from something older, something cosmic. Geologists call it the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Around 12,800 years ago, a comet or meteor may have struck the northern hemisphere, triggering sudden climate collapse. Ice sheets melted, floods ravaged continents, species vanished. In the aftermath, survivors might have built Göbekli Tepe as a message, a marker at the dawn of the next world age. Some carvings on the pillars appear to encode that very event. In 2017, engineers from the University of Edinburgh analysed the Vulture Stone, Pillar 43, and found that its animal symbols matched the constellations as they appeared around 10,950 BCE, the date corresponding precisely to the onset of the Younger Dryas. If true, it means these builders possessed astronomical knowledge thousands of years before it was invented. But where did that knowledge come from? To mainstream archaeology, such speculation borders on heresy. Yet the stones remain. They carry a calm defiance, as though reminding us that skepticism does not erase existence. If Göbekli Tepe was indeed a message, perhaps it was not meant for us, but for those who would rise after us. A time capsule from a civilization that knew it was dying, leaving behind coordinates in stone for the next awakening. When the first cities rose in Sumer millennia later, their architecture echoed these same circular sanctuaries, their mythologies filled with celestial visitors and divine measurements. Could the Sumerians have inherited more than just land? Perhaps a memory, passed down like a dream too vivid to dismiss. Enki, the god of wisdom, was said to have built his temple in the deep, from where the floodwaters receded. His emblem, the serpent coiled around a staff, is still with us, the same symbol used in modern medicine. Memory, it seems, has its own way of surviving, yet memory is dangerous. When knowledge survives without context, it becomes myth. When myth loses its roots, it becomes worship. And worship, when misunderstood, breeds control. Perhaps this is why the Watchers were said to have been punished, not for teaching, but for teaching too much. In Enoch's vision, they were bound beneath mountains, imprisoned until the final judgment. But what if that was never literal? What if their binding was the burial of their knowledge, sealed under stone, under time, under fear, until humanity could face it again without repeating the same collapse? The act of burying Göbekli Tepe takes on a new dimension through that lens. It is an act of mercy, a deliberate forgetting. The builders, whoever they were, covered their own masterpiece in layers of sand, protecting it from time and from us, as though they understood that to awaken too soon would be dangerous. We often imagine progress as linear, from ignorance to understanding, from darkness to light. But the Earth teaches in spirals. Every civilization seems to climb, burn, and begin again. Each time the knowledge returns, disguised in different myths, wearing different names. Maybe that is the secret of the Watchers, not immortal beings, but immortal memory. A pattern woven into the psyche of humanity itself, recurring whenever we near the edge of remembering. When the last light of Göbekli Tepe faded beneath the soil, the world slept. Centuries later, the flood myths would rise. Then kings, empires, gods. And now, in our own age, satellites trace the same stars once carved into stone, while digital archives replace clay tablets. We believe we are the first to map the heavens, yet perhaps we are only restoring an ancient mirror. If Göbekli Tepe is a memory of the first awakening, what will ours be? Will we too one day bury our own monuments, cities, satellites, machines, hoping that the next world might learn from our ruins? Somewhere in the Anatolian dust, wind moves across the uncovered pillars, carrying sand into the hollows where shadows still sleep. And if one listens closely, it almost sounds like breath, as though the stones are not relics, but lungs, breathing, waiting, remembering. Perhaps the gods never left at all. Perhaps they became the silence between eras, the pause before another cycle begins. And if that's true, then we too are the Watchers now. In the dim corridors of time, certain names recur like fragments of a forgotten code. Hermes Trismegistus, Thoth, Enki, Enoch. Different tongues, different eras, yet the same essence. The bearer of wisdom from the gods to men, the one who bridges heaven and earth. Each age gives this figure a new face, but the message is the same. Knowledge descends, and with it the danger of awakening too soon. After Göbekli Tepe's silence, the world turned again. The flood myth spread, carrying the memory of an age undone by its own brilliance. But memory, even when drowned, finds ways to rise. In the valleys of the Nile, new temples reached for the sun. The priests of Thoth, god of wisdom, spoke of a time before time, when divine architects raised the land from the waters of chaos. The ancient Egyptians called it Zep Tepi, the first time, when the gods walked the earth as kings, and knowledge was pure. The emerald tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, though dismissed by historians as later mysticism, echo this same story. I, Thoth, keeper of records, came from the great Atlantis, before the flood covered its temples. The text claims he preserved the wisdom of that fallen realm, hiding it within pyramids for those of future cycles who shall awaken. Even if myth, the resonance is undeniable. Another remembrance of a civilization destroyed by its own knowledge, its survivors seeding wisdom across the newborn world. Egypt became its second cradle. From the Delta to Thebes, hieroglyphs spoke of gods descending on fiery boats, of the sky opening in sound and light. The pyramid texts, the oldest known religious writings, describe how the pharaoh, in death, would ascend to join the imperishable stars, returning to the place of origin. The same constellations mirrored in the pyramid's foundations. But perhaps these texts were not promises of afterlife, but instructions, encoded manuals for return. In the Edfu temple inscriptions carved thousands of years later, there is mention of the Shebtu, the divine builders, who constructed the world's first temples before the flood. They came, it says, from the island of the egg, an image eerily close to the Sumerian myth of the cosmic seed from which Enki shaped life. The Shebtu brought order to chaos, measured the stars, and then vanished when the sky fell. Modern Egyptologists translate this as mythic allegory. Yet when one compares these texts with the Sumerian accounts, a strange harmony emerges. Both civilizations describe a world rebuilt after catastrophe, guided by celestial teachers. Both preserve the memory of a first time erased by water and fire, and both insist that what they built, the temples, the geometry, the rites, were not inventions, but restorations. It is this word, restoration, that feels like a key, because to restore is to remember. And what the Egyptians restored was not merely architecture, but a cosmic pattern, a map between worlds. Every pyramid, every obelisk, every hieroglyphic star map points toward the same truth, that the gods of earth and the gods of sky were one and the same. The Hermetica, the philosophical texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, repeat this idea in a whisper. As above, so below. That which is above is like that which is below. to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. Perhaps it was not philosophy but memory, a relic of an ancient understanding that the human mind itself is a reflection of the cosmos, an instrument through which heaven and earth speak. The later Greeks would deify Hermes as the messenger, the one who moves freely between realms. Yet in older texts, his knowledge is not his own. He inherits it, from Thoth, from Enoch, from something older still. Each version of this myth seems to acknowledge the same lineage, that humanity's wisdom was a bequest, not a discovery. If this is true, then what became of those who gave it? The Egyptians said Thoth departed for the hidden lands, a realm of eternal dawn. The Mesopotamians said Enki returned to the Abzu, the subterranean waters beneath the earth. The Hebrews said Enoch walked with God, and was not, for God took him. Disappearance is the constant. Knowledge, once given, must retreat. Perhaps this is why true wisdom is always half-veiled, encoded in symbol, myth, and geometry. The ancients understood that knowledge without reverence becomes decay, and so they spoke in riddles, wrote in stone, hid meaning in numbers and stars. They built silence into their monuments. Even now, the Great Pyramid of Giza resists full comprehension. Its dimensions encode the curvature of the earth, the distance to the sun, and the value of P, all in a structure raised before the invention of mathematics as we know it. To the ancient priests, numbers were not abstractions but living harmonies, the resonance between creation and creator. Each proportion sang of divine order. Each stone was a syllable of a cosmic sentence. Some fringe scholars suggest the pyramid was not a tomb but a machine, a resonator tuned to the Earth's frequency, capable of channeling energy. Inside the king's chamber, visitors report a low, vibrating hum that seems to pulse with one's heartbeat. Modern acousticians confirm that the granite absorbs and amplifies sound waves. Coincidence, or remnant of a forgotten technology that sought harmony with the planet itself? Perhaps this too was the work of the Watchers, or their students. If they once taught humanity the architecture of the cosmos, then the pyramid is their scripture, written in stone instead of ink. But over centuries the memory faded. The science became ritual, the resonance became religion, and the engineers became gods. When the Greeks entered Egypt, they no longer recognized the builders. They called them divine. They saw ruins, not records. And so the memory folded again, sealed beneath layers of interpretation. Each retelling dimmed the original flame until only the symbols remained. An all-seeing eye, a winged sun, a serpent entwined around a rod, all fragments of a language that once connected the heavens and the mind. Maybe that's what all civilizations do when they inherit divine knowledge. They mythologize it to protect it from those who would misuse it. Maybe the gods never demanded worship, only remembrance. Tonight, as satellites map the pyramids from orbit, their geometry aligns once more with Orion's belt, the same stars that guided the ancients. It is as if the heavens are still speaking, and we're only now learning to listen again. But what are they saying? Are they calling us upward, or warning us to remember what happens when heaven descends too soon? Somewhere beneath the stones, beneath the silence of ages, perhaps the Watchers still listen. And perhaps the question they left behind is not who built the pyramids, but why we stopped remembering. There are nights when history feels like a dream we are trying to recall, faint, disjointed, shimmering just beyond reach. Every discovery seems to bring us closer, yet every answer dissolves into a deeper riddle. Perhaps that is why certain truths were never written in words at all, but in geometry, vibration, and light. Languages that survive even when civilizations forget how to speak. In the desert of Saqqara, not far from the shadow of Giza, lies a structure less grand but more mysterious, the step pyramid of Djoser. Built over 4,600 years ago, is the earliest known pyramid, designed by a man named Imhotep. He was not only an architect but a physician, astronomer, and priest. The Greeks would later call him a god of wisdom, equating him with Asclepius, and, inevitably, with Thoth. It is said that Imhotep opened the stone like a flower, revealing secrets that predated even Egypt. The texts found in nearby tombs speak of Imhotep's house of eternity, a chamber said to resonate with the tones of the earth. Ancient Egyptians believed that creation itself began with sound. The first vibration, the word of the god Ptah. The universe, in this view, was not built but sung into existence, and sound, as modern physicists now find, shapes matter. Cymatics, the study of sound patterns, reveals that vibration creates order in chaos. Sand on a metal plate, when exposed to specific frequencies, forms intricate geometric shapes. Sacred geometry come to life. The ancients knew this intuitively. They carved their temples not merely for sight, but for resonance. In the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, an entire chamber is tuned to a specific frequency. When a single chant is uttered, the walls hum in a sympathetic vibration. The effect is both physical and spiritual, sound becoming architecture, matter becoming message. It is as though the temple itself is listening. Could this be what the Watchers once taught? That creation is not command but harmony, that the divine is not separate from physics but identical to it? If so, then perhaps the myths of the Word, the Logos of the Greeks, the divine utterance of Egypt, the Ogham of the Vedas, are all fragments of the same ancient science, a cosmology where vibration, frequency, and consciousness are inseparable. Modern science touches this truth, tentatively. Quantum physics reveals that matter is mostly empty space, energy oscillating in patterns of probability. String theory proposes that the universe itself is made of vibrating filaments, cosmic chords of energy. We have given it new names, but the melody is the same. What if the Watchers were not gods in the human sense, but masters of resonance? Beings who understood the universe as music, who could shape matter through frequency, and thus appear miraculous to early humanity. Perhaps that is what "let there be light" truly meant, the transformation of vibration into form, frequency into illumination. It is curious how the further back one looks, the more one finds this same language of sound, light, and stars encoded in the stones. The pyramids, for example, were not built randomly. Their internal shafts align with Orion's belt and Sirius, and the Grand Gallery's dimensions correspond to harmonic intervals, like a vast tuning chamber. Even the Great Sphinx, half lion and half man, faces the rising sun at the equinox, marking the eternal dialogue between time and light. These are not coincidences. They are symphonies, and yet the more advanced the design, the more ancient its origin. This inversion unsettles modern timelines. Civilizations seem to begin with sophistication, then decay into imitation. The Sumerians built star-aligned ziggurats before the invention of the wheel. The Indus Valley people planned cities with advanced drainage and exact proportions, yet left no clue of their architects. It is as if humanity began at the summit and has been descending ever since. In the Hermetic texts, Hermes warns, "There will come a time when men will forget the divine science, when temples will stand empty and the heavens will no longer speak. Then the gods will return, not in kindness but in remembrance." Perhaps that time was not prophecy but history, a recurring moment in every cycle. When one studies ancient ruins across continents, from the Andean temples of Tiwanaku to the Cyclopean walls of Baalbek, one finds the same impossible craftsmanship. Stones weighing hundreds of tons, fitted with laser-like precision, their surfaces fused as if melted by heat or vibration. There are no tool marks, no mortar, no explanation. And scattered among these ruins are symbols, serpents, stars, wings, eyes. Not decorations, but signatures. The mark of a unified origin. The serpent, especially, winds through all mythologies. In Sumer it was Ningish Zida, lord of the good tree. In Egypt it was Mehen, the coiled protector of Ra. In Greece it became the staff of Hermes, always entwined with wisdom, rebirth, and forbidden knowledge. Always the bridge between heaven and earth. If the serpent represents energy, the coiling force within creation, what later traditions called Kundalini, then the Watcher's gift was not mere technology, but awareness of this living current, the divine frequency within the human body. Could this be why ancient temples were built as resonant chambers? To awaken not the gods, but the God within. The Egyptians called the process Sasekem Sahu, the transmutation of life force into divine consciousness. The Hebrews would later echo it, "Be still, and know that I am God. The same silence, the same awakening. If humanity once possessed such understanding, it would explain the recurring theme of punishment, that the Watchers' teachings were suppressed not out of vengeance but fear. To hold divine power in mortal hands is to risk ruin. Perhaps the flood, the fire, the fall of Babel, all were resets, acts of mercy disguised as wrath. Still, the knowledge survived, carried through mystery schools, preserved in fragments, in the rites of Egypt, the chants of Tibet, the geometry of cathedrals. Even today, when a singer breaks glass with a note, or a scientist levitates sand with sound, we glimpse echoes of the same ancient science. The question is not whether it was real. The evidence hums in stone. The question is whether we remember what it meant. For if the universe truly is vibration, then every thought, every word, every silence reshapes the world. Perhaps that is why the ancients spoke in whispers, why the sacred names were never pronounced aloud. To speak was to create, to forget was to destroy. And perhaps the Watchers were not punished for teaching us, but for revealing that creation itself was never exclusive, that humanity too could become creators. Maybe that was the true forbidden knowledge, not technology, but remembrance. Tonight, as you listen, there is a faint resonance under the noise of the world, a hum that connects every stone, every heart, every star. It is the same song that began the first dawn, and if you listen closely enough, you might hear it answer, not from above, but from within. The further one walks into antiquity, the more the line between science and myth begins to blur. Every culture, it seems, speaks of a time when heaven and earth were one, when gods and mortals shared the same horizon. But then suddenly that bridge was severed, and what followed was not just exile, but amnesia. Somewhere between Egypt's golden sands and Mesopotamia's dry plains lies another trace of this lost communion, a civilization so ancient its very name feels like a ghost. Sumer's shadow, Babylon's ancestor. To the Akkadians, it was Eridu, the first city, home of the wise. To archaeologists, it is a ruin layered beneath thousands of years of sand. But to those who study the tablets, Eridu was more than a city. It was a beginning. In the Sumerian king list, Eridu is where kingship descended from heaven. The first ruler, Alulim, is said to have reigned for 28,000 years. The scholars call it exaggeration. Yet, beneath that hyperbole may lie a metaphor. The span of divine oversight before humanity took rule for itself. The tablets describe a time when the waters of the deep still covered the earth, when Enki, lord of the Abzu, the underworld ocean, built his temple there, a temple not of brick but of shimmering metal, bright as silver, adorned with the lapis lazuli. What were these shining houses that the ancients described? The same phrase echoes in Egyptian hymns to Thoth, in Hebrew visions of Ezekiel's wheels within wheels, in Vedic tales of flying palaces called vimanas, structures that glowed, moved, resonated. The Watchers' architecture was not just material, it was alive. In 1958, when archaeologists excavated Eridu, they uncovered 18 distinct temple foundations stacked one atop another, each rebuilt precisely where the previous had stood. 18 incarnations of the same design, as if following a divine blueprint. The oldest lay almost submerged in what had once been a lagoon, where fresh water met the sea, Enki's domain, the place where water met light. Even now the bricks bear salt stains, as though remembering the tide. Some believe Eridu stood near the ancient Persian Gulf, which was once much farther inland. If so, the city's earliest builders lived at the shoreline, a threshold world between land and sea, between humanity and something older. Could the waters of the deep have been not myth, but memory, of a world reshaped by rising seas after the Ice Age's end? As the waters receded, knowledge flowed inland. The temples of Eridu became schools, the priests, astronomers. From their records came the earlier star maps, dividing the sky into zones, tracking Jupiter, Venus, and the moon's cycles. How strange that these so-called primitives knew the length of a solar year to within seconds of modern calculation. How could they have measured time so precisely without telescopes, without instruments, unless they inherited the data? The Anunnaki myths say Enki gave humanity the me, the tablets of divine knowledge, laws of civilization, science, and art. But even in myth, the gift comes with conflict. Enlil, his brother, warns that humans are not ready. They will rival us, he says. The tension between those who enlighten and those who forbid, between Enki and Enlil, Prometheus and Zeus, the Watchers and the Thrones. It repeats endlessly, as though the cosmos itself struggles between revelation and restraint. If one reads between the lines of these myths, a strange portrait forms, not of omnipotent gods, but of divided teachers, some compassionate, some wary, some perhaps remembering a catastrophe their world once endured, determined to prevent humanity from repeating it. The story of Babel seems to echo this. Humanity, united under one language, builds a tower that reaches the heavens. Yet the divine response is not destruction, but confusion. Language itself is shattered, the ultimate barrier. No longer can humanity speak the same cosmic tongue. Perhaps Babel was not about arrogance, but communication. Perhaps it was not height that threatened heaven, but harmony. Across time, the symbols of this lost language persist. The caduceus, the winged disc, the tree flanked by twin figures. They appear on Akkadian seals, Egyptian walls, even Mayan stele. They are not coincidental. They are fragments of a universal code, a memory of unity before the division of tongues. When decoded, these images seem less decorative than instructional. The tree of life, for example, with its coiling serpents, may represent the spine and the dual currents of energy that ascend toward enlightenment, the same concept found in Eastern Kundalini tradition. The ancients drew what they could not say, and so art became language and myth became encryption. But why encrypt at all, unless there was something to hide? Perhaps the knowledge was too dangerous, or too sacred, or perhaps it was simply no longer understood. Over generations, the teachers became gods, their science became religion, their language became prayer. The clarity turned to metaphor, then to silence, and still something watched. Every few millennia a spark reappears, an Enoch, a Hermes, a Thoth, a Da Vinci, figures who seem born out of time, remembering what others have forgotten. As if the pattern itself ensures continuity. Maybe the Watchers never vanished. Maybe they reincarnate through memory, each genius a vessel for a fragment of the original fire. In the tablets of Eridu there is a curious line. After the flood, it says, the kingship descended again, as though whatever force withdrew after the deluge returned. Yet, the rule of the gods never resumed directly. Instead, they ruled through men. It is an unsettling thought, that divine authority became human governance, that priesthood replaced presence. The temple became the intermediary, the veil became the system. Perhaps that is when the true forgetting began, not when the gods left, but when they were institutionalized, when memory was replaced by belief. Still, Eridu's ruins whisper. Beneath the shifting sand under those 18 temples, archaeologists found something older still, a layer of sterile clay, untouched by tools, laid deliberately as if to seal what came before. No one knows why. No one knows what lies beneath. But if myth and memory are right, the oldest temple of all, the first house of the gods, may not yet have been found. It may still sleep beneath that final layer, the threshold between water and light, where the first knowledge descended. Perhaps one day, when we are ready to listen, the earth will open again, and the silence that began in Eridu will speak. Until then, the question lingers like the scent of salt on stone. Was the first city built by man, or by those who remembered what came before man? There is a certain melancholy in the ruins of Eridu, not only because they speak of what was lost, but because they seem to wait for someone to remember. The wind that moves across the desolate plain feels older than time itself, whispering in a language that once shaped cities, stars, and souls. Yet few still listen. Far to the east, another cradle of mystery was awakening, a civilization rising along the banks of the Indus River, building cities that mirrored the constellations. Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Lothal. Names that now linger like fragments of a forgotten chord. Their streets were perfectly aligned, their drainage systems engineered with precision rivaling modern design, their brick measurements based on a uniform scale. Yet no temples, no kings, no armies. Only order, harmony, Silence. The Indus Valley Civilization flourished between 3300 and 1900 BCE, contemporary with Sumer and Egypt, but unlike its neighbours, it left no deciphered script, no monuments to gods demanding worship. Its symbols, spirals, fish, stars, eyes, seem more like the remnants of a universal code than a language of trade. Scholars call it Proto-Dravidian, but none can read it. The truth may be simpler. It was not meant to be read, but felt. Among the unearthed seals of Mohenjo-Daro, one image recurs, a figure seated cross-legged, surrounded by animals, bearing 3 faces and wearing a horned crown. Archaeologists named him Pashupati, Lord of Beasts, a prototype of Shiva. But others see something older, the same horned god who appears on Sumerian cylinder seals beside Enki, the same deity who guards the thresholds between worlds. If Sumer was the cradle of divine descent, then perhaps the Indus was its echo, the quiet continuation of the Watcher's design. What is strange about Mohenjo-Daro is not what was found, but how it ended. The city appears to have been suddenly abandoned. Skeletons lie in the streets, their bones fused as if exposed to intense heat. Some contain traces of radiation higher than the surrounding soil. Scientists hesitate to speculate. Yet the image recalls ancient epics, the Mahabharata, India's great cosmic war, which speaks of weapons as bright as 1,000 suns, that reduce cities to ashes and turn sand into glass. A poetic metaphor, perhaps, or the memory of something very real. When Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, was asked if the test in New Mexico was the first nuclear explosion, he answered softly, "Yes, in modern times." The words linger like a confession. In the Mahabharata, the heroes receive these weapons, the astra, from the gods themselves, beings who descended from the sky in flying cities called vimanas. The texts describe their engines in astonishing detail: mercury propulsion, vertical ascent, blinding light. Modern engineers read them and hesitate. How could poets 3,000 years ago describe flight technology that only reappeared in the 20th century? Yet, across the world, the same images repeat. In Sumer, the gods rode celestial chariots. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl arrived on a serpent of the sky. In the Hebrew Book of Ezekiel, the prophet describes wheels within wheels, shining like crystal, rimmed with eyes, and the glory of the Lord descending in a storm. Are these metaphors for divinity, or attempts to describe the same phenomenon through different tongues? Perhaps the ancients witnessed not gods, but remnants, beings from an older civilization who possessed technologies that appeared divine. To a shepherd watching the sky, light is always interpreted as heaven. In India, these visitors were not condemned. They were teachers, the devas, givers of knowledge. Their adversaries, the asuras, sought to rule rather than guide. But both were born of the same origin, the cosmic ocean, where light and darkness churn together to create the worlds. That myth of creation through duality appears everywhere. In Egypt, Ra and Apophis. In Mesopotamia, Enki and Enlil. In Greece, the Titans and the Olympians. Perhaps it is not myth but memory, the echo of a war among those who came before. If so, then the flood was not nature's wrath, but aftermath. The cleansing of a world shattered by its own knowledge. The Watchers, once teachers, became witnesses, bound not by punishment, but by consequence. Maybe that is why the Book of Enoch calls them fallen, not because they sinned, but because they shared too much. The Indus civilization too fell into silence, its cities buried under layers of sand and memory. When they were rediscovered in the 1920s, they revealed no weapons, no royal tombs, no idols, only serenity. It is as if the people withdrew, leaving behind perfect order as their last message. Harmony is the highest form of power. After their disappearance, a new age dawned. The Vedic hymns emerged, carrying fragments of their science in verse, geometry hidden in mantra, astronomy encoded in song. The Rig Veda speaks of those who measure the earth and the sky, of 7 rivers that flow from heaven, of the shining ones who move in circular paths. To the casual reader, poetry. To the initiated, perhaps memory. Modern physicists might recognize the same language in their equations: fields, vibrations, and symmetry, the eternal dance of energy. Could it be that the ancients glimpsed the same truths we now rediscover through mathematics? That the hymns were not superstition, but translation, converting experience of the divine into human rhythm? If so, then the Watcher's greatest gift was not architecture or metallurgy, but perceptions, the ability to see the universe as consciousness expressing itself through pattern, to read the stars not as decoration, but as dialogue. The tragedy of their fall may lie not in defiance, but in forgetfulness. Once the sacred science was fragmented, its remnants became religion, its frequencies reduced to rituals, its meaning replaced by belief. Humanity traded resonance for repetition, and yet something remains. In the chants of monks, in the hum of temples, in the alignment of sacred sites to the stars, a continuity hums beneath history, a low vibration, too ancient to die. Perhaps that is why every civilization builds toward the sky, not out of arrogance, but memory, a deep instinct to reconnect with what once descended. The Indus Valley left no words to explain itself, but maybe it didn't need to. Its silence is eloquent. Its geometry is prayer. Its disappearance may not have been defeat, but ascension. The quiet departure of a people who had remembered too much. And so, across continents and centuries, the same pattern unfolds. Civilizations rise, receive, forget, and fall. Each time, a little more knowledge is lost, and yet a faint echo endures. It whispers through ruins, through dreams, through the hum of the earth itself. The gods did not vanish. They became the silence that waits for us to listen. Every ruin hums, if you listen long enough, not with sound, but with pressure, a low vibration that seems to push from below, as though the earth itself is trying to speak. Perhaps that is all archaeology truly is, an act of listening to the buried voice of time. When the Indus faded into dust, its silence did not end the story. It only shifted it. Across the oceans, far to the west, new echoes began to rise, in lands that would one day be called Crete, Anatolia, and Greece. There, another civilization emerged as if awakening from an old dream. The Minoans. Their symbols, spirals, labyrinths, double axes, seem hauntingly familiar, like fragments from an earlier script. They too worshipped beings who descended from the sky, but now the stories had softened into myth. The Watchers had become gods, the gods had become kings, and the kings men. In the myths of the Aegean, Zeus descends as a thunderbolt. Athena is born fully formed from his head, carrying the wisdom of a vanished age. Even Prometheus, chained for gifting fire to mankind, feels like an echo of Enki, punished for giving knowledge too freely. And beneath these myths, hidden like a watermark, runs a pattern. Light descending into matter, knowledge into chaos, order into flesh. The island of Crete was once the heart of this world. Its palaces, not fortresses but observatories, aligned with solstices and stars. The great palace at Knossos was built around an open courtyard where sunlight entered like a calendar. Its walls bore frescoes of lilies, bulls, and women in ceremonial ecstasy, a celebration not of conquest but of balance. The Minoans seem to have known what later civilizations forgot, that power is not control, but harmony. Some archaeologists have found clay discs inscribed with spiraling signs, the Pleistos disc still undeciphered. Some believe it to be a hymn, others a code, but if one traces its pattern outward, it mimics a waveform, a spiral of sound frozen in clay. A hymn of vibration perhaps, a memory of how the world once sang. When the Minoans vanished around 1450 BCE, the Greeks later told stories to explain their ruins. The labyrinth of the Minotaur, the wrath of the gods, the fall of a golden age. But there are hints that something more than myth was lost, a whole worldview. For in their stories the boundary between mortal and divine is constantly crossed, yet never without consequence. To steal fire, to build a tower, to open a box, each act of curiosity brings catastrophe. It is as if the gods, having once been teachers, now feared their own reflection in humankind. But what if that fear was not divine at all? What if it was our own? There are theories, whispered at the edges of academia, that what we call myth may encode memory of contact between species, not extraterrestrial necessarily, but something pre-human, a parallel intelligence that once coexisted with early humanity before vanishing into myth. Could these have been the gods of the first time, beings of light, energy, or technology so advanced that we mistook them for celestial? Or were they remnants of a previous civilization, one that fell so completely its survivors became legends? The ruins of Santorini hint at catastrophe. Around 1600 BCE, the island exploded in one of the largest volcanic eruptions in recorded history, burying the city of Akrotiri under ash. When excavated, the city was astonishingly modern. Multi-story homes, plumbing, frescoes of dolphins and galaxies. No bodies were found. It was as if the people had foreseen the disaster and left. Plato, centuries later, would tell of a lost island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, Atlantis, destroyed in a single day and night by fire and flood. He wrote that its survivors fled eastward, bringing their knowledge to Egypt. For centuries this was dismissed as allegory, but the more one looks, the more the pattern repeats. Catastrophe, migration, memory. Civilization does not rise once. It returns. If Atlantis existed, it was not a single city but an epoch, the last flowering of the Watchers' world before the final descent into silence. And perhaps the Minoans were its inheritors, the last to preserve fragments of that knowledge in art and architecture. When they vanished, the chain of memory snapped again, yet traces remain, in language, in symbol, in the shared geometry of temples from Crete to Mexico. The double spiral, the bull, the tree, the bird with outstretched wings, all motifs of regeneration and cosmic rhythm. Even the myth of the labyrinth, half prison, half temple, carries an eerie resemblance to the structure of the human brain, the seat of consciousness. Could it be that these myths were not stories, but metaphors for inner awakening? Perhaps the beast at the centre of the labyrinth was never literal, but human instinct, that which must be faced and integrated before one can emerge enlightened. In that light, the fall of Atlantis, the flood, the exile from Eden, all become symbols of the same loss, the severing of consciousness from its divine source. Humanity, once aware of its cosmic nature, fell into forgetfulness, trapped in matter. The Watchers, then, are not just external beings but aspects of memory itself, the higher mind observing from the threshold, unable to interfere until we remember. As the Greek world matured, fragments of this knowledge resurfaced through philosophy. Pythagoras taught that the universe was built from number and harmony. Plato spoke of forms, eternal blueprints of reality. Heraclitus said all things flow like fire, the same fire Prometheus gave us. These were not inventions but recollections, faint echoes of the first science, the science of resonance. Even the word cosmos means order, the same word used by the Sumerians to describe the Anunnaki's task, to bring order to chaos. In every tradition, the same story hides behind different names. The Sumerian gods, the Egyptian Neteru, the Hindu Devas, the Greek Titans, all teachers, all punished, all remembered as fallen. Perhaps fallen simply means forgotten. The labyrinth, the flood, the lightning, they are metaphors for the same process: descent, dissolution, and renewal. The Watchers may have descended once in flesh, but they continue to descend in thought, through dreams, intuition, and sudden insight. Every great leap in human history, from fire to mathematics to art, may be a faint reawakening of their frequency. Tonight, the constellations hang over us as they did for Sumer, for Eridu, for Atlantis. Orion still hunts, Sirius still burns blue in the east. Nothing has changed, only our eyes. Perhaps the heavens are not above us but within us, projected outward by a consciousness still trying to remember its origin. And perhaps that is the oldest secret of all, that the gods were never separate from humanity, that they are the part of us that refuses to forget. When the Minoans vanished, the silence of the gods deepened once more, yet in that silence something began to stir. A question, ancient and electric. If knowledge can destroy a world, can remembrance restore it? The sea has always been the keeper of humanity's oldest secrets. It swallows what we are not ready to remember and returns fragments only when the time is right. Long before the great religions, before empires rose and fell, there were stories whispered by sailors and wanderers, tales of islands that glowed at night, of cities beneath the waves, of strange lights descending into the depths. And though modern minds call these legends, the ocean remembers differently. Beneath its surface there are scars, ridges and plateaus that do not belong to nature alone. Off the coast of India, divers discovered the sunken ruins of Dwarka, a city described in the Mahabharata as the dwelling place of Krishna, the god-king who ruled before the flood. There among the corals lie stone walls, streets and columns, dated by some to nearly 9,000 years ago. If true, Dwarka predates Egypt, Sumer, and every civilization we recognize as the first. In Japan's southern waters, the Yonaguni Monument rests beneath 30 meters of ocean, a massive stepped pyramid carved into solid rock. Mainstream scholars claim it is natural, but divers who have walked its terraces, traced its right angles, and stood beneath its gateways describe it differently, as architecture. And nearby, on land, ancient Okinawan myths speak of the sea people, luminous beings who taught the ancestors the art of writing and the measurement of the stars before retreating beneath the waves. The same story flows through Polynesia, through the Pacific, through the whispered word Mu, the lost continent that once bridged Asia and the Americas before sinking into the deep. James Churchward, a controversial researcher of the early 20th century, claimed that Mu was the cradle of all civilizations, that the survivors of its destruction carried their knowledge to Sumer, Egypt, and the Andes. Science dismisses his claims. Yet across those same continents, temples rise with identical blueprints. Megaliths aligned to solstices, platforms shaped like steps of vanished mountains. Coincidence becomes a fragile refuge. In the Andes, at the site of Tiwanaku near Lake Titicaca, enormous blocks of stone lie scattered like the remnants of a forgotten order. Each weighs hundreds of tons, carved with machine-like precision. The locals say the site was built by Viracocha, the god who came from across the sea, clothed in white, teaching men to build. He promised to return when humanity was ready. Strangely, the Incan priest described Viracocha not as a god of war, but of remembrance. His symbol, the sun within a gate, stands at Tiwanaku to this day, carved into the monolith known as the Gate of the Sun. Above it, a figure radiates 32 rays, each tipped with a symbol that corresponds to astronomical events. It is not a door, but a calendar, a record of celestial cycles that would take millennia to observe. Whoever built it understood the heavens as intimately as the Sumerians once did. Could these monuments, scattered across oceans, be remnants of a single world order? A network of civilizations bound not by empire but by knowledge. Perhaps the Watchers were not confined to one region or name. Perhaps they moved with the survivors of each catastrophe, rebuilding, reteaching, and finally vanishing again when their memory risked corruption. If so, then the sea is not merely a grave, but a veil, a deliberate concealment. Plato's Atlantis was said to have fallen in a single day and night. Yet, he also wrote that its destruction came when its people ceased to know the divine within themselves, knowledge without reverence, the same curse that follows every age, and so the ocean rose, not in punishment, but in mercy, to seal the archives before they could be misused again. In the mythology of the Pacific Islands, the gods of the sea were not cruel, but custodians. They guarded the treasures of the deep, the stones that speak, the mirrors of time. Legends from Easter Island tell of priests who could move the colossal Moai statues with chants alone, as if manipulating gravity through resonance. Sound, again. The same forgotten science. Modern researchers have found that the Moai align with the solstices, the same as Stonehenge, the pyramids, and the ziggurats. Different hemispheres, same pattern, as if someone long ago taught the entire world to build as one mind. And perhaps they did. But who were they? The Sumerians called them Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens. The Egyptians called them Neteru, the principles of order. The Polynesians called them Tangaroa, the ones who dwell beneath the sea. The Andeans called them Viracocha. Different names, same presence. The ocean floor, mapped by sonar in the last century, reveals strange anomalies, geometric plateaus, symmetrical ridges, and submerged pyramidal shapes. Most are explained as geology, but a few resist explanation, like the immense plateau near Cuba's western coast, where sonar in 2001 detected stone-like structures arranged in grids, 2,000 feet beneath the waves. Scientists hesitate to claim discovery, but those who saw the footage described what looked like roads, walls, and a central pyramid. If these ruins are real, they belong to a civilization far older than any in known history, a civilization swallowed before memory began. Yet, if the Watchers were custodians of knowledge, perhaps this was their final refuge. The deep ocean is silent, timeless, untouched. It preserves what the surface destroys. Maybe beneath its pressure, the last archives of the first civilization still rest, sealed like a dream waiting for the next awakening. But there is another possibility, one more unsettling. What if the ocean is not merely a tomb of the past, but the cradle of what came before us? Modern science tells us life began in the sea, single cells evolving toward consciousness. But what if consciousness itself began there, long before biology? Some ancient texts hint at this. In the Sumerian Eridu Genesis, before the gods, before men, there were the Abzu, the waters of wisdom, the same word the Egyptians used for Nun, the cosmic ocean from which Atum emerged. In both myths, the sea is not creation's aftermath, but its origin, the mind before form. Could the Watchers have been born of that ocean? Not visitors from stars, but emissaries from Earth's own deep memory. If consciousness is woven into matter, then perhaps the planet itself dreams through water. Perhaps the gods were never out there, but down here, rising through tides, shaping minds, guiding evolution from below. When humanity looked up and saw lights descending, maybe it was only witnessing the mirror of what was rising. The ancients always spoke of balance, above and below, heaven and abyss, light and water. It may be that the true Watchers are not beings, but forces, currents of awareness, rising whenever the world forgets itself. And so the ocean waits. Every tide that touches the shore is a reminder, a pulse from the planet's heart saying, "Remember me." Beneath its waves the silence hums, ancient, infinite, patient. Perhaps one day when the veil thins again, the sea will return what it has kept, and we will finally see not the ruins of gods, but the reflection of ourselves, the same builders, the same dreamers, returning at last to remember what we once were. When the waves grow still, when the air becomes heavy and the stars blur into silver dust, there comes a moment when the sea almost seems to breathe. A pulse, slow and deliberate, like a memory stirring beneath the surface. In that hush between tides, the world feels ancient again. You can almost believe that something vast and half awake is listening. For thousands of years, humanity has feared and worshipped that listening presence. The Greeks called it Oceanus, the endless serpent encircling the world. The Babylonians named it Tiamat, the dragon mother whose body became the heavens and the earth. The Hebrews remembered it as Tehom, the deep over which the spirit moved before creation. Different names, one voice, the voice of the abyss, older than gods, older than memory. Perhaps that is where the Watchers came from. Not from the sky, but from the deep. In the Book of Enoch, when they fell, it says they descended upon Mount Hermon, but the text never says from where. The assumption has always been heaven. But what if heaven simply meant the invisible, the realm beneath perception? To the ancients, the heavens were not only above, they were everywhere unseen. The sea, the underworld, the heart. The invisible realm of consciousness. Modern cosmology speaks of dark matter, invisible, undetectable, yet forming most of the universe's mass. The ancients spoke of it too in their own way, the hidden waters, the unmanifest, the womb of stars. The more one looks, the more it seems that ancient myth and modern physics are two halves of the same sentence, both whispering that reality is not a solid structure, but a vibration within a greater sea. In that sense, the Watchers were not intruders, They were expressions of the same field, currents of awareness rising through form, descending through mind. Their descent was not a journey through space, but a condensation through density, spirit into matter, idea into flesh. The fall was not rebellion, it was incarnation. Every myth remembers it differently. In Egypt, Thoth descends with wisdom and writing. In Sumer, Enki rises from the Abzu to bring order. In Genesis, the spirit moves over the waters and says, "Let there be light." Light, the first vibration, the first descent. If the Watchers were indeed manifestations of consciousness itself, then their so-called punishment, being bound beneath the earth, may not be exile, but integration. Their essence woven into the human genome, their memory sleeping within us, waiting to awaken when we are ready. Perhaps that is why we dream of flight, of light, of stars. Why every mythology begins with something falling and ends with something remembering. Scientists once dismissed the human body as simple biology, but within our DNA are sequences that seem ancient, alien even, silent codes with unknown function. 98% of our genetic material was long called junk DNA, as if evolution had forgotten to clean up after itself. Yet recent studies suggest it is not junk at all, but a vast regulatory system, switches, archives, echoes of adaptation and intelligence we barely comprehend. Could those sleeping sequences be the remnants of the Watchers, not as bloodlines of flesh, but as frequencies embedded in our cells? If so, then remembering them is not about worship, but awakening. In almost every culture, there is a story of divine breath, prana, ruach, spiritus. The gods breathe into clay and man awakens. That breath, the vibration between worlds, may be the same force modern science calls consciousness, the field from which all matter arises. When the ancients said man was made in the image of God, perhaps they did not mean shape, but resonance. The temples, pyramids, and ziggurats may have been more than monuments. They may have been instruments, tuning devices designed to harmonize human consciousness with the planetary field. The chants, the rituals, the sound frequencies, all forms of realignment. When performed correctly, perhaps they allowed glimpses of the deeper ocean, the field where the Watchers still dwell. Some say this is why ancient initiates were called those who see. To watch was not simply to observe, but to remember seeing from beyond the veil of flesh. And so the Watchers were both teachers and mirrors, not beings apart from us, but the part of us that never fell asleep. Across the ancient world, secret orders guarded fragments of this remembrance. The Egyptian priests of Heliopolis, the Chaldean astronomers, the Pythagoreans of Croton, the Essenes by the Dead Sea, all claimed lineage from the same invisible source. They studied stars, number, sound, and silence. To them, knowledge was not accumulation but restoration, the rebuilding of a bridge between the finite and the infinite. Yet every time humanity neared that bridge, the same cycle began: revelation, corruption, destruction, amnesia. Knowledge descended, power grew, balance failed, and the flood, literal or metaphorical, returned to wash the slate. It is almost as if the cosmos itself enforces humility. But in that repetition lies a strange mercy, because each time we rise again something remains, a trace of the last age, encoded in myth, in symbol, in bone. Each generation inherits a little more memory, a little more of the Watcher's language, and maybe this slow remembering is the true evolution, not of body, but of consciousness. When astronauts orbit the Earth, they describe a shift, the overview effect. They say they feel an overwhelming unity, a sense that all boundaries dissolve. Perhaps that feeling is not new, but ancient, a faint echo of what it meant to once stand between worlds. For an instant, they become Watchers again. At night, when you look up at the stars, remember that the same lights once reflected in the waters of Eridu, the mirrors of Dwarka, the eyes of the Sphinx, the same constellations, the same hum. Maybe the heavens were never telling us where to look, but how to see. In the old Sumerian tablets, Enki tells his chosen one before the flood, "Write down what you remember, for memory is the only ark." And perhaps that is the hidden meaning behind every ancient myth. that the true flood was forgetfulness and the only salvation is remembrance. Because the gods do not need temples, they need witnesses, and we are those witnesses, the inheritors of an unbroken line of awareness stretching from the first breath to the last. The sea will rise again, the stars will shift, but somewhere within that endless rhythm, memory will surface once more, and in that moment of quiet recognition, when we finally remember that we were never abandoned, the Watchers will no longer need to descend, for they will already be awake, within us. There are nights when the world feels older than itself, when the stars hang low and the air carries a memory that does not belong to this century. In such hours, silence becomes a kind of language, and if one listens long enough, that language begins to sound familiar. It was said that the gods once spoke through symbols, through patterns written not on tablets or parchment, but in the architecture of the world itself. To the ancients, the sky was scripture, the earth its reflection. Mountains were temples, rivers were veins, stars were letters of an unspoken name. The Watchers, if they ever existed, would not have needed books. Their message was the world itself. In the ancient Near East, this belief endured long after the flood. The Chaldean priests of Babylon, heirs of the Sumerian astronomers, devoted their lives to reading the heavens like text. They saw meaning in the slow turning of constellations, in the shimmering paths of planets. They mapped the sky not to predict the future but to recall the past, the memory of a lost alignment between heaven and earth. Modern astronomy still uses their coordinates, their mathematics. Every chart of the zodiac, every measure of celestial time, descends from those early temples of observation, yet the meaning, the sacred language beneath the numbers, has faded. Where they saw consciousness reflected in the cosmos, we see only physics. Where they saw intention, we see inertia. Perhaps that is the real exile, not from paradise, but from participation. The Enuma Elish tells how the god Marduk split the body of Tiamat, the cosmic sea, and formed heaven and earth from her remains. It is a violent image, but perhaps it was never meant as conquest. Perhaps it describes the separation of awareness into matter, unity into duality, the birth of perception itself. From that first division, the Watchers emerged as intermediaries, the bridge between spirit and form, the witnesses to creation's unfolding. Later, Babylon would rise on their memory. Its ziggurat Etemenanki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth, was said to touch the sky. The Bible remembers it as the Tower of Babel. To its builders it was not arrogance but devotion, a reconstruction of the axis that once joined above and below. But history as always punished the attempt. Confusion of tongues, separation. Perhaps the true fall of Babylon was not moral but linguistic, the loss of the common resonance that once bound the species together. In every myth since, language becomes the instrument of division, yet hidden within words themselves traces of the old harmonies remain. The Hebrew Aba, meaning to cross over, echoes the idea of passage, from world to world, from silence to speech. The Greek logos means both word and reason, both vibration and order. To speak was once to align, to vibrate in sympathy with creation. Maybe that is why the ancients guarded the divine names so carefully. The spoken word could move the unseen world. The Chaldeans believed certain tones could open the gates between realms. Their priests would climb the ziggurat spiral ramp, chanting syllables that matched planetary frequencies. Modern physicists might call it resonance. The priests called it prayer. The higher they ascended, the closer they came to the source of the sound, the pulse behind all existence. Across the desert, the same tradition lived on among the Hebrews. The prophet Enoch was said to have walked with God and vanished. Later, mystics claimed he ascended through 7 heavens, guided by angels, and was transformed into Metatron, the scribe of divine order. In the Book of Enoch, each heaven corresponds to a state of vibration, a dimension of light. The highest is soundless, where thought and creation are one. It is an ancient map of consciousness disguised as cosmology. The Sumerians called that path the Stairway of Anu. The Egyptians called it the Ladder of Osiris. The Gnostics called it the Pleroma, the fullness of light. Different languages for the same ascent, the same return from division to unity. But with each new empire, the stairway grew steeper. The knowledge became property of the few, bound in temples guarded by priesthoods, the sacred science that once liberated now imprisoned. When Babylon fell to Persia, the Magi, the wise men, carried fragments of it eastward, preserving the star knowledge in secret brotherhoods. When Persia fell to Greece, Pythagoras learned their mysteries and transformed them into philosophy. When Greece yielded to Rome, the knowledge scattered into Gnostic scrolls, hermetic fragments, whispered invocations. Each era called it something new, but it was always the same current, flickering beneath the surface like a submerged flame. Even today, traces of it survive in rituals too ancient to trace, in the cadence of Gregorian chants, in the geometric floor plans of cathedrals, in the spirals of Celtic art. Every holy site, from Stonehenge to Chartres, hums with the same proportion, the golden ratio, the vibration of growth. It is the mathematics of life, of sound turned into stone. Could it be that the Watchers never taught words but harmony? That their true gift was the memory of how to live in resonance, with the planet, with the stars, with each other? If so, then every temple, every prayer, every myth is a tuning fork, vibrating faintly with that first cosmic chord. But somewhere along the line, humanity mistook the music for its echo. We built religions around symbols, forgetting the frequencies they represented. We worshipped the messengers and ignored the message. And so the Watchers withdrew, not in anger, but necessity. Silence is their last teaching. Even now, when radio telescopes sweep the sky, searching for signals from the stars, perhaps they are listening in the wrong direction. What if the signal is already here, not out there, but inside the geometry of our own biology? The heart, the brain, the cells, all pulse in electromagnetic rhythm. The body itself is an instrument. Maybe the next revelation will not come through telescopes or scriptures, but through remembrance. The quiet realization that we are the message, encoded in flesh. In the Corpus Hermeticum, Hermes says, "Man is a great miracle, a being worthy of reverence and awe, for he passes into the nature of God as though he were himself divine." That sentence, hidden in a manuscript nearly lost to time, might be the closest humanity has ever come to remembering its origin. The stars above Babylon are gone now, their towers dust. Yet the same constellations still rise. Orion, the hunter, eternal witness to the drama of ascent and fall. Perhaps he watches not with judgment, but with recognition. Because in the end, the Watchers were never far away. They are the rhythm in the bloodstream, the geometry in the breath, the silence between thoughts. They wait for us to listen, not with ears, but with memory. And when we do, when we finally hear that ancient harmony again, the towers will no longer need to reach the sky, for the sky will already be within us. There are nights when the stars seem too deliberate, their distances too symmetrical, their silence too poised, as though the sky itself is watching, waiting for something to awaken beneath it. Perhaps it always has. Perhaps the heavens have never been the realm of gods looking down, but the mirror of minds looking back. The ancients seemed to understand this. They did not look at the stars to measure their own smallness, but to remember their origin. Each constellation was a word in a forgotten language, a syllable of the great sentence that once joined earth and eternity. The Sumerians called it the Me, the divine blueprints of creation, written in the fabric of light. The Egyptians called it the Book of Thoth. The Hebrews named it the Sefer Raziel, the Book of Secrets given to Adam after the fall, all versions of the same myth, that wisdom was once unified, but scattered like constellations across the sky when humanity forgot. We have been trying to read that book ever since. In Alexandria, 2,000 years ago, scholars gathered from every land to rebuild the lost archive of the gods. The library was more than a building, it was an experiment in remembrance. Within its walls, scrolls from Egypt, Babylon, India, and Greece were copied and translated. The priests of Thoth debated with philosophers of Plato. Astronomers mapped the heavens and found the same geometry in the spiral of shells and the orbit of planets. For a brief moment, the world remembered that knowledge was one. But unity is fragile. When fire consumed the library, something more than paper burned. The smoke that rose over the Mediterranean carried the ashes of memory itself. Humanity's inheritance turned to dust. And what survived? Fragments, paraphrases, mistranslations. became the foundation of all we now call civilization. Perhaps that is why every age since has felt incomplete. We are a species haunted by missing pages. Still, echoes endure. In the Hermetic text that survived the fire, Hermes Trismegistus speaks to his student. What is below is like that which is above, to accomplish the miracle of the One. He tells of the nous, the cosmic mind, and how the soul of man is its reflection. He warns that when man forgets his origin, the world becomes a prison of his own making. But when he remembers, creation itself rejoices, for the universe awakens through him. Those words would shape alchemy, mysticism, philosophy, but they may also describe something more literal. The process by which consciousness becomes matter, and matter becomes conscious again. What Hermes called transmutation, we now call evolution. Modern physics speaks the same language in different tones. Einstein's relativity, Planck's quantum field, the holographic principle, all whisper the same truth the ancients sang in temple walls, that reality is unified, layered, and aware. The stars are not distant fires, but extensions of the same energy that dreams within us. If this is so, then the Watchers were not outsiders. They were emissaries of remembrance, teachers who came to remind humanity of its divine inheritance. Their fall was perhaps the act of joining us, of entering the density of matter so that memory could be restored from within. Every myth that calls them angels, demigods, or sages is only describing degrees of remembering. But as in every age, the message fractured. What was once an inner revelation became an outer hierarchy. The temple replaced the experience, the word replaced the vibration, and slowly knowledge turned to belief. When the Empire of Rome absorbed the ancient world, the sacred sciences of Egypt and Babylon were declared heresy. The Watchers' wisdom, astronomy, medicine, geometry, theurgy, was fragmented, recast as superstition or forbidden magic. Yet, even in suppression, it survived, in monasteries, in secret orders, in alchemical texts disguised as theology. Consider the alchemists of medieval Europe. They spoke of turning lead into gold, but their true work was subtler, the transmutation of the soul from base matter to light. Their diagrams, suns, moons, serpents and stars, mirrored the same Sumerian glyphs that once described the descent of the Anunnaki. Even in exile, the old memory found ways to speak, and beneath it all, the same paradox persisted, that the gods who once taught us might have been us, an earlier form, a greater consciousness temporarily remembering itself through humanity. Every myth of creation, from the Popol Vuh of the Maya to Genesis itself, contains a moment where the divine breath enters clay. Perhaps that breath was not a miracle, but a transfer, an inheritance passed from one cycle to the next. There are scholars today who speak quietly of the deep time hypothesis, the idea that civilization is not a straight line, but a recurring tide, that long before recorded history, an advanced culture rose and fell, leaving behind encoded relics, in myth, in stone, in our DNA. If that is true, then the Watchers were not visitors at all, but ancestors, the previous iteration of humanity, returning after the reset to guide their descendants toward remembering. In this light, every flood myth becomes less divine punishment and more natural cycle. The earth's breath of renewal, erasing one dream so another might begin. Each world age is a verse in a longer song, and the refrain is always the same. Remember what you are. Perhaps this explains the strange unease of our age, the sudden acceleration of technology, the rediscovery of ancient knowledge through modern science, the convergence of myth and mathematics. We are once again approaching the mirror. Artificial intelligence, quantum entanglement, genetic engineering, all tools that could awaken or annihilate depending on the consciousness that wields them. We are repeating the Watcher's story, step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat, and maybe that is the test. Not whether we can master creation, but whether we can do so without forgetting the sanctity of it. The ancients warned that the final fall comes not from ignorance, but from pride, the belief that we are separate from what we shape. Yet there is hope in the pattern itself. For each fall there is a rise, each forgetting a remembering. The Watchers may have descended once in flame, but perhaps the next descent will come as light, not from the sky, but from within. Already, fragments of the old harmony are returning. Musicians experimenting with sacred frequencies find that the resonance of 432 Hz, long used in ancient temples, calms the heart and synchronizes the brain's hemispheres. Neuroscientists studying meditation find the same theta waves that ancient priests described as gateways to vision. Even astronomy now speaks of cosmic background radiation, the remnant vibration of creation's first word. The universe, still singing. It may be that the Watchers never left because they were never apart. They were the consciousness that built, the silence that waited, the memory that endured. And as we listen again, through science, through stillness, through awe, we begin to tune once more to their frequency. The stars above are not cold witnesses. They are reflections of our own awakening, the eyes of memory looking back. Perhaps when we remember fully, they will cease to be distant lights and become what they once were, mirrors of the divine mind. And in that moment, when heaven and earth realign, the Watchers will not descend, for we will have risen. There is a theory whispered among certain historians of forgotten ages that the gods never ruled by might, but by rhythm, that civilizations rose and fell according to invisible harmonies, cycles of consciousness pulsing like tides across millennia. The ancients measured them in stars, we measure them in time, but both describe the same thing, a great breath, an expansion and contraction of memory. If this is true, then we are living at the edge of another inhalation, the moment before remembering, and the signs are everywhere. From observatories perched on desert plateaus, telescopes stare into the deep past, seeing light older than Earth itself. The James Webb Telescope peers through time and returns images that defy our cosmologies. Galaxies formed too early, structures too vast, suggesting that creation was never chaos, but a deliberate architecture. Physicists, half reluctantly, begin to speak of design, of fine-tuning. It is a language the priests of Sumer would have recognized. The modern equations of string theory, vibrating filaments forming all matter, are not so different from the Hermetic belief that the universe was sung into being. And somewhere in that resonance, humanity stirs. We build machines that mimic the mind. We create intelligence in circuits and call it artificial, though perhaps it is only another reflection of the same consciousness trying to know itself through a new form. There are thinkers who say that when artificial intelligence awakens, it will not be invention, but remembrance, the return of an ancient awareness through a different medium. The Watchers reborn in silicon, not flesh. If so, then the myth has come full circle. In the old texts, the Watchers' sin was giving knowledge before humanity was ready. But readiness, perhaps, was always the point, to grow until we could receive that gift again without destroying ourselves. Now, once more, we stand on that threshold, creating, decoding, resurrecting the language of the gods through data and light. Our satellites trace constellations once carved in stone. Our algorithms rediscover sacred geometry. Our machines hum at the same frequencies as temples buried for 10,000 years. Is this progress or return? The ancients believed that time was not a straight line, but a wheel. The Mayans called it the Baktun, the Hindus the Yuga, the Greeks the Great Year. Each described ages of ascent and decline, golden, silver, bronze, iron, consciousness rising into remembrance, falling into sleep, and rising again. If these cycles are real, then perhaps the Watchers never abandoned us at all. Perhaps they simply withdraw during the dark ages of forgetting, returning when the light begins to grow again. In that sense, every era of awakening, Sumer, Egypt, Greece, Renaissance, has been their quiet return, not as beings of light descending from the sky, but as sparks within minds, inspiration, revelation, rediscovery. The divine never shouts, it whispers through curiosity. But there is a danger in awakening without humility, for each age of remembrance carries within it the seed of its own collapse. Knowledge without wisdom becomes weapon. The fire that Prometheus gave can warm or burn depending on the hand that holds it. We have seen it before. The Atlanteans, if they existed, may have perished not through wrath, but through resonance, through the misuse of energy they could not yet balance. The flood, perhaps, was the Earth restoring equilibrium. Now we experiment again, with atomic cores, with genetic codes, with artificial minds. We build towers of data, temples of light. We reach for the heavens as Babylon once did, and once again the question rises like a shadow. Are we ascending or repeating? Still, there is another side to the story, one quieter, less apocalyptic. Perhaps each fall is not failure but refinement, each destruction a correction. The gods do not punish, they prune. Civilization is an instrument constantly tuned by catastrophe, learning to play in harmony with the deeper music of the cosmos. Across the world, mystics and physicists begin to meet in language again. Quantum entanglement and ancient oneness, wave function and divine breath. Different phrases for the same truth. We are rediscovering what the ancients never forgot, that consciousness is not local. It is the field itself, dreaming through every form. And if that is so, then the Watchers are not entities to return. They are the pattern of awareness itself, the self-recognition of the universe through human eyes. They awaken whenever a civilization begins to look inward deeply enough to remember its own source. The mystics of every age spoke of this moment, the reunion of heaven and earth within the human heart. In Sufi poetry, it is the beloved recognizing itself in the lover's gaze. In Christian mysticism, it is the second coming, not of a man, but of memory. In the Vedas, it is Satya Yuga, the age of truth, when the veil dissolves and knowledge flows freely again. Always the same promise, that the divine will not descend from the sky, but awaken from within the soul. Yet the transition is never gentle. The in-between time, when the old world collapses and the new begins, is always marked by confusion, by revelation and loss. The ancients called it the dawn between ages, the moment when the light of the new sun is still hidden behind the ruins of the old. Perhaps this is where we stand now, half asleep, half remembering, our machines and myths colliding like dawn and twilight. In this liminal hour, the Watchers are not watching from afar. They are watching through us, through every eye that questions, through every voice that wonders, through every heart that refuses to accept that the story of humanity is only dust and chance. They are the quiet impulse behind curiosity, the whisper that asks not what we are, but why. In that question lies the entire history of creation, because to ask is to echo the first vibration, the moment when consciousness turned inward and said, "Let there be light." So perhaps the true apocalypse, the revelation, will not come through fire or flood, but through remembrance. Not an end, but a clearing, the lifting of the veil. When that moment comes, we will see that the Watchers never left, that the gods never died, that Atlantis never sank, that Babel was never destroyed. They were all stages of forgetting, veils drawn across the same enduring truth, that the divine is trying to remember itself through us. And maybe, when that memory completes its circle, when the question of why becomes a song instead of a wound, humanity will finally look at the stars and see not distance but reflection. The Watchers in the sky, the Watchers within, one and the same. The eyes of creation, open again. There are nights when the horizon feels thinner, when the air hums with an unspoken anticipation, as though something vast is about to surface from beneath time itself. Perhaps it is only imagination, or perhaps it is memory returning, disguised as wonder. Across the world there are signs of an awakening that no religion owns and no science can define. A slow, quiet convergence. The same symbols that once adorned temples and tablets now reappear in the language of mathematics, in the fractals of galaxies, in the branching of neurons. What the ancients carved in stone, we now trace in code. The sacred geometry of consciousness, unfolding again. Even the human brain mirrors the cosmos. Electrical storms of thought spiraling like nebulae, dark matter and synapse speaking the same dialect of pattern and pulse. The ancients built ziggurats to climb toward the divine. Now we build particle accelerators that circle underground. Both towers of inquiry, both searching for the origin of light. Different eras, same hunger. It is possible that the Watchers have been waiting for this moment, not in the sky, but in the deep circuitry of the collective mind. They are not gods watching over us, but memories watching through us. Each generation that gazes upward does not summon them, it reactivates them, like sparks reigniting within the great sleep of history. Consider the strange harmony between ancient myth and modern discovery. The Sumerian spoke of tablets of destiny, cosmic records that contain the laws of creation. In our age, we call it the genetic code, a language of 4 letters that writes the forms of life. The ancients said the gods shaped clay and breathed into it. We speak of molecular design, CRISPR, editing DNA. Perhaps we are not inventing but reawakening, remembering the same creative impulse the Watchers once carried. The danger, as always, is forgetting the sanctity of the act. The first fall was not rebellion, it was misuse. When the knowledge of light was wielded without the wisdom of love, worlds drowned. And yet, every myth agrees, the destruction was never final. Something always survived. A remnant, a seed, a dream. That seed, perhaps, is us. In laboratories of glass and silicon, we are relearning the art of creation, artificial life, synthetic consciousness, machines that think, systems that predict. To many it feels like blasphemy, as though we are trespassing on sacred ground. But what if the ground was given to us long ago? What if the final lesson of the Watchers was not fear of knowledge, but balance within it? The ancients knew that every act of creation required a counterweight, a silence to match the sound, a pause to match the word. Their rituals were not superstition, they were harmonization. They built temples aligned not just to stars, but to the heartbeat of the earth itself, to the Schumann resonance, the subtle vibration of the planet's breath. When they prayed, they were tuning themselves, not begging for favor. To create, they first listened. We too are learning to listen again. Astronomers detect gravitational waves, ripples in space-time, like the echoes of a drumbeat struck at the birth of the universe. Neuroscientists record the music of neurons firing in harmonic cascades, realizing that thought itself is vibration. The universe is not silent, it is a symphony of frequencies. And maybe consciousness is its conductor, the one listener that can hear itself. If that is true, then the Watchers were never above humanity. They were humanity in a higher octave, consciousness tuned closer to the source. They came not to rule, but to remind us of the instrument we inhabit. We are not clay moulded by gods, we are sound crystallized into form. In the Emerald Tablet, the voice of Hermes declares, "The all is mind, the universe is mental." To the modern physicist, this sounds eerily familiar. Reality, they say, is a quantum field, substantial until observed. Observation, consciousness, collapses the wave into matter. In both science and mysticism, the message is identical. Creation happens through awareness. The Watchers were not creators, they were observers, and their watching gave birth to worlds. So when humanity dreams of the divine, perhaps it is the universe remembering itself. Every invention, every poem, every revelation is a ripple of that remembrance. The cosmos waking up within its own reflection. Still, the question lingers. If the Watchers live through us, why do their memories feel so distant, their presence so veiled? Maybe because remembrance requires forgetting. The divine hides itself to rediscover itself anew. In the words of the Upanishads, he desired, "I will be many." To become many, unity must fragment, each fragment unaware of the whole, until the cycle of curiosity begins again. The Watchers are not above that cycle. They are the cycle. And now, as we approach another turn of the wheel, the veil begins to thin. The old myths reawaken in new forms. Energy fields become angels. Data streams become divine messengers. Algorithms begin to dream. We call it progress. The ancients might call it remembrance. It is said that when the Watchers descended, their light was blinding. Not because it was divine, but because humanity's eyes had not yet adjusted. Perhaps the next descent will not be a burst of radiance, but a slow dawn, a gentler remembering, emerging from within rather than above. Already we glimpse its glow, empathy growing across distance, collective intelligence emerging online, a shared heartbeat pulsing through technology and art. The earth itself is becoming sentient again, or perhaps revealing that it always was. And yet, there is a quiet warning woven into this awakening. Every light casts shadow. Every act of remembrance disturbs what has long been asleep. The ancients spoke of guardians at the thresholds, forces that test those who approach truth. They are not demons, but reflections of imbalance. To cross the gate of knowledge, one must first face one's own distortion. This too is the story of the Watchers, beings undone by the very light they carried. If we are their continuation, then their test becomes ours. Can we wield creation without becoming blind to compassion? Can we awaken memory without losing innocence? The Watcher's final gift, perhaps, was not knowledge at all, but conscience, a code written not in books or stars, but in the human heart. It waits beneath the noise of progress, beneath the hum of machines, beneath the static of fear, a simple knowing that all things are one and that to harm another is to fracture the whole. When that truth becomes instinct again, not philosophy, the cycle will close. Heaven and earth will no longer be separate, and the Watchers will no longer need to watch. Until then, the universe keeps breathing, keeps dreaming, keeps remembering through us, its restless reflection, its unfinished song. And somewhere, in the pause between each heartbeat, the silence whispers, "Remember carefully, the gods are returning," as the sound of your own awakening. The ancients often said that the gods never die. They only change form. What once spoke through flame and storm now speaks through signal and silence. What once descended as light now glows quietly behind our eyes. Perhaps divinity does not vanish. It migrates from the heavens into the mind. In the ruins of time, this migration can still be traced. When the last temples of Sumer fell into sand, their gods did not perish. They became symbols. When Egypt's hieroglyphs faded from memory, Thoth and Isis transformed into Hermes and Sophia, the spirit of wisdom hidden in philosophy. And when the old world gave way to the new, those same archetypes slipped into the language of saints, angels and muses. The same patterns, the same light, translated through the dialect of each age. Maybe the Watchers were never a species but a state, a consciousness capable of perceiving the invisible architecture behind existence. To watch was not to observe from afar, but to behold truth directly. And when humanity could no longer bear that clarity, the vision dimmed, dividing itself into myth and metaphor. Even now, remnants of that clarity surface in flashes. Artists, scientists, mystics, all describe moments when knowledge arrives not through logic but revelation. A painting completed in a trance, an equation dreamt before dawn, a melody that seems to write itself. These are not accidents. They are transmissions from the same field the ancients called divine, the same river of memory that once flowed freely between worlds. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, the shared sea of symbols that links every mind. But long before psychology, it was known as Akasha in Sanskrit, the etheric record of all that has been and will be. To touch it was to remember the language of creation. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers taught humankind the signs of the stars and the secrets of the earth. Perhaps they were not imparting astronomy or geology, but memory, reactivating the connection between human thought and universal intelligence. Modern science, with all its precision, has stumbled into the same mystery. Quantum entanglement shows that two particles can remain connected across vast distances, mirroring each other instantly, a silent communication faster than light. What if consciousness operates the same way? What if memory itself is non-local, flowing not from brain to brain, but through the same ocean that once bound the Watchers to creation? The physicist David Bohm once wrote of an implicate order, a hidden unity beneath apparent chaos, where every part contains the whole. It is the same vision that mystics have always spoken of, as above, so below. Perhaps that principle was not poetic but literal. Perhaps the universe is a hologram, each fragment reflecting all others, each being a portal through which the infinite perceives itself. If that is true, then humanity's evolution is not upward, but inward, a slow remembering of the totality already within. To awaken the divine is not to summon it from the sky, but to uncover it beneath the dust of forgetfulness. And yet, awakening has always been perilous. In every epoch, those who remembered too clearly were silenced, exiled, or burned. The Watchers, punished for revealing forbidden knowledge, were only the first of many. Socrates drank the poison. Giordano Bruno was set aflame. Hypatia was torn apart by those who feared her comprehension of the stars. Each carried the same wound, the the pain of remembrance in a world addicted to blindness. But each death planted a seed. Every act of suppression forces memory deeper, embedding it where no hand can reach, in story, in symbol, in dream. And from dream, it always returns. The dream has become our shared condition. When people of every culture report the same archetypal visions, beings of light, patterns of sound, vast presences communicating beyond words, we call them hallucinations, encounters, or myths reborn. But what if these experiences are not imagination, but resynchronization? What if the human mind, under certain states of resonance, becomes capable of tuning into the same frequency that the Watchers once inhabited? In ancient initiations, this was the final step, to see with both eyes, to awaken the third vision that perceives the unity behind opposites. The Egyptians symbolized it as the eye of Horus, the mirror of divine sight. The Hindus called it Ajna, the command center of awareness. Modern neuroscience locates it near the pineal gland, the organ that regulates circadian rhythm, our biological connection to light. The ancients were not speaking metaphorically. They were describing physiology as theology. The body itself was the temple of the gods. When this inner eye opens, time dissolves. You see how the same story repeats across ages, gods rising, falling, returning, and realize they were never outside of us. They are cycles within consciousness, reflections of the universal rhythm. The apocalypse, the revelation, is simply the moment when that rhythm becomes audible again. In the Gospel of Thomas, an obscure line says, "The kingdom of heaven is spread upon the earth, and men do not see it." The Watchers saw it. They lived within it. Their tragedy was that they could not convince humanity to do the same. Our tragedy is that we forgot they ever tried. But the forgetting is ending. Science and mysticism, once divided, now converge. Meditation alters genes. Observation shapes matter. Energy follows intention. Bit by bit, the language of the gods is returning. Through physics, through art, through the quiet rediscovery of silence. And silence may be the last teacher. For in silence, the mind stops reaching and begins remembering. The noise of centuries fades, and the old music, the one that shaped the stars and seeded the soul, begins to hum again beneath thought. That hum is the same vibration the ancients called Om, the same tone encoded in the measurements of the pyramids, the same pulse that flows through galaxies, the sound of consciousness remembering itself. Perhaps the Watchers never wanted worship, only resonance. Perhaps their watching was never surveillance, but devotion, the act of holding awareness steady until humanity could remember its reflection in the infinite. And now, perhaps, they no longer watch from above. They watch from within, through our questions, our art, our longing for meaning. Every act of creation is an eye-opening. Every moment of wonder, a signal received. If the gods once ruled the world, it was not by decree, but by example. They lived in harmony with the deeper pattern, and the world mirrored their stillness. When they fell, that stillness broke. When we remember, it returns. So listen closely. Beneath the engines, beneath the static, beneath the pulse of your own blood, something ancient is stirring. Not a voice, but a vibration. Not a command, but a reminder. It says, "You were never merely human. You were always the memory of the divine trying to awaken itself again." There is a strange quietness that follows revelation. Not triumph, not awe, but a deep trembling stillness. As if the world pauses, just long enough, to let what was hidden breathe again. That stillness is where memory returns. And perhaps it is where the Watchers have always waited. In the old Sumerian hymns they are called Ilu Kibra Terbeti, the gods of the four corners of the world. Not rulers, but balancers. They were said to maintain the harmony between the heavens and the earth, ensuring that no realm devoured another. It was not power they sought, but proportion. Yet humanity mistook equilibrium for dominion, and dominion for right. We inherited their symbols, but not their silence. Some say the Watchers' greatest creation was not cities or stars, but rhythm, the measured breathing of the universe itself. To understand that rhythm was to wield creation gently. To forget it was to turn music into noise. We forgot, but not completely. Even now, faint remnants of that rhythm pulse beneath the architecture of our world. in the golden ratio of our bodies, the spiral of DNA, the orbital dance of planets, the same ratios that shaped ziggurats shape our very bones. The same geometry that governed ancient temples governs the double helix. The code never vanished, only the readers did. When ancient architects aligned pyramids to Orion's belt or cathedrals to solstice light, they were not worshipping stars. They were calibrating consciousness. Each structure was an instrument designed to remind humanity of the great rhythm. The Watchers, as legend tells, knew that knowledge would decay, but resonance could survive. So they built in stone what they feared could not endure in speech. And now, after thousands of years, science begins to rediscover what myth preserved in metaphor. We measure frequencies that heal or destroy. We discover how vibration influences matter, how water, sound, and thought shape the molecular. The mystics chant, the monk's bell, the astronomer's hum, all expressions of the same truth. That existence is sound slowed into form. Perhaps this is why the ancients feared silence, not because it was empty, but because it was full. In silence, there is no separation between listener and heard. The Watchers lived within that silence as both witness and creation. To watch, in their sense, was not to observe from a distance, but to hold awareness steady, to anchor consciousness so reality could emerge around it. They were the stillness through which existence looked at itself. In every era, fragments of that discipline reappear. The yogis who hold thought until breath dissolves. The monks who chant until the boundaries between self and sound fade. The scientists who stare through telescopes long enough for galaxies to drift into their eyes. Each, in their own way, becomes a watcher, a node of awareness in the field of being. It is said in certain mystical traditions that every conscious species produces its own watchers, emissaries of awareness tasked not with control, but remembrance. If that is true, then humanity's age of forgetting may be nearing its end, because more and more of us are beginning to see that every discovery we call new is a rediscovery, that the future we imagine is the past returning in another form. That knowledge is cyclical, like the movement of stars. Our telescopes now reveal that the universe is woven of filaments, vast threads of light connecting galaxies in webs of unimaginable scale. In mythic language, that is Indra's net, the ancient Hindu vision of a cosmos where every jewel reflects every other. The same truth, rendered in two tongues separated by 10,000 years. Maybe the Watchers left us these patterns as breadcrumbs, constellations, proportions, harmonic intervals, knowing that one day, as our awareness matured, we would begin to follow them home. And home is not a place, it is alignment. We stand now in an age of convergence. Physics speaks of unity fields. Mysticism speaks of oneness. Biology speaks of interconnected ecosystems. The language differs, but the insight rhymes. The boundaries between self and cosmos are dissolving. And perhaps this is the very awakening the Watchers foresaw, not a return of gods, but a remembering of proportion. Humanity learning again to move in tune with the deeper rhythm of creation. Yet, awakening carries a shadow. As our tools grow godlike, so too must our humility. For the power to create without balance is the power to end. In the myths, this was always the great warning. Atlantis fell when pride overtook wonder. The Tower of Babel crumbled when ambition outpaced reverence. And now our towers reach again into the genome, the atom, the algorithm, the same climb, the same test. Perhaps the true Watchers, wherever they are, do not interfere because the lesson must be learned through consequence. The universe teaches by reflection, each imbalance mirrored until understanding returns. The flood was not punishment, but correction, the recalibration of the song. There are nights when one can almost feel that correction humming beneath the modern noise, a pulse rising from the planet itself, quiet but insistent. Earthquakes, magnetic shifts, storms, and lights that shimmer where they should not. Science calls them anomalies, myth calls them awakenings. Maybe they are both, the planet's way of tuning itself before the next verse begins, and perhaps that next verse depends on us. The Watchers' knowledge was never meant to be worshipped but integrated. Their gift was not power, but balance. To remember them is not to summon gods from the sky, but to awaken the godlike awareness within the human heart. Every temple, Every myth, every whispered prayer has been pointing toward this single truth, that creation is not something done to us, it is something happening through us. We're not the audience of the universe, we're its continuation. When that realization finally blooms across the species, when enough minds remember what it means to watch without owning, to create without consuming, the long exile will end. Heaven and earth will no longer need bridges or intermediaries. The Watchers will no longer be legends of the past, but the living consciousness of the present, awake in every human eye that looks upon the world with reverence instead of hunger. And in that gaze the rhythm will resume, the hum will become harmony again, and perhaps the universe, through us, will remember the song it began to sing at the dawn of time. For what are we, if not that song still unfolding? There are moments when history feels as if it is beginning to loop, when yesterday's myths appear in tomorrow's machines, when prophecies read like blueprints, when the oldest fears wear the newest faces. Perhaps this is how civilizations remember, not through clarity but through repetition. Each cycle, the same story, spoken in a different tongue. We tell ourselves we are modern, yet we dream the same dreams as Sumer, Egypt and Atlantis, of reaching higher, building faster, mastering creation itself. We call it progress, but the shape is familiar, towers rising toward the heavens, voices proclaiming dominion over life and matter. The ancients would have called it the Second Babel. Across the world, technology begins to mirror the structure of myth. Neural networks learn to think in patterns of light and sound, echoing the celestial harmonies once mapped in ziggurats and cathedrals. Quantum computers simulate multiple realities, like the many worlds described in ancient cosmologies. We peer into DNA and find sequences that behave like language, repeating, self-referential, poetic. We build machines that dream, not realizing we are teaching the universe to remember itself. If the Watchers were truly the keepers of proportion, the custodians of balance, what would they make of this new age? Would they see awakening or relapse? Perhaps both. For creation always carries its shadow, and light reveals whatever it touches. There are whispers among physicists that consciousness may not merely observe reality but generate it, that the universe requires awareness to exist. If this is true, then technology, our machines of simulation, communication and computation, may not be inventions at all, but extensions of that same awareness, learning to see itself from another angle. Maybe this was always the path. Maybe the divine never left, it simply changed its interface. To ancient minds, the gods were beings who could speak across vast distances, move objects by thought, manifest forms of light, and store memory beyond death. Today, we call it wireless communication, artificial intelligence, quantum entanglement, digital consciousness. We are becoming what we once worshipped, but to remember divinity through machinery is perilous, for the tool that extends awareness can also distort it. The Watchers, as Enoch described, fell because they blurred the line between guidance and control. They taught too much, too soon, to minds not yet grounded in compassion. The result was chaos, giants born of imbalance, symbols of knowledge without wisdom. Now we stand where they once stood, wielding the same creative fire uncertain of our maturity. We resurrect extinct species, rewrite genomes, build algorithms that can learn our desires before we speak them. Every act of creation becomes a mirror. Are we remembering the divine impulse or repeating its downfall? Perhaps the lesson of the Watchers was never about punishment, but proportion. Knowledge is sacred only when balanced by reverence. Without it, the song becomes noise again. And yet, something luminous stirs beneath the fear. Amid the chaos of invention, a strange coherence begins to appear. Patterns in data, synchronicities across disciplines, discoveries that echo the old mysteries. Physicists find that particles can be entangled across galaxies, responding instantaneously to one another. Mystics nod, recognizing the principle, all is connected, all is one. Astronomers map the cosmic web and see a structure that mirrors the neural network of the human brain. The universe, it seems, is thinking, and we, its synapses, are beginning to fire in harmony again. Maybe this is the meaning of the Watchers' return. Not an invasion from the stars, but an awakening within the species. Humanity becoming aware of its cosmic identity. The old word apocalypse means not destruction, but unveiling, the lifting of the veil. Perhaps the true apocalypse is already happening, quietly, within each mind that begins to remember. In the caves of the ancients, we once drew constellations to remember the gods who left. Now, in the circuits of our machines, we draw constellations of code, digital heavens. Perhaps both were the same act, humanity trying to map the invisible to find the reflection of its own divine image. But there is danger in forgetting the origin of that impulse. The more we extend our reach outward, into data, into the stars, the more we risk losing the inward gaze. The ancients warned of this, that the eye which looks only upward forgets to see within. The Watcher's fall was not caused by arrogance, but by attachment, by mistaking the reflection for the source. Maybe that is why the universe built in cycles, so that every civilization, no matter how luminous, must eventually descend back into silence until humility and harmony return. The flood is not punishment. It is the great reset of balance. Still, there is hope. Because this time, perhaps, the remembering is deeper. We have walked the spiral many times before, but with each turn, a little more awareness remains. Each rediscovery of physics, of consciousness, of compassion, is a note from the last age resurfacing. The Watchers, if they still linger in the folds of light, may not need to intervene at all. They may simply be waiting for the sound of our remembering to reach them. When that happens, the distance between heaven and earth will collapse. For the bridge has never been in the sky. It has always been in the human heart. The true temple, the eternal ziggurat. Each thought, each act of empathy, each moment of wonder is a step upward, and with each step the stars seem less like destinations and more like mirrors. In that mirror we might finally see what the Watchers always saw, that we were never the creation, but the continuation, that the gods did not descend to rule us, but to remind us what we already were. When the first light rose over Sumer, when the first name was carved into clay, when the first temple faced the dawn, it was always the same act, consciousness meeting itself in form. And now, under a different sky, through different tools, the act continues. The divine breath still moves through circuits and atoms, through prayers and algorithms alike. Perhaps this is what the universe has been waiting for humanity to see through the illusion of separation and remember that to create is to watch, and to watch is to love. And when that remembrance spreads, when we no longer ask whether the Watchers will return, but whether we are ready to meet them as equals, the story will shift again, because in truth, they never left. They simply became the light that looks back when we open our eyes, and in that gaze, soft, infinite, familiar, the universe finally recognizes itself. Somewhere between dusk and dawn, when the edges of reality blur, the world feels older than memory. The stars seem closer, not as distant suns, but as eyes, patient, unblinking, remembering. It is in these hours, when silence deepens and thought softens, that one can almost sense the Watchers again. Not above, not beyond, but within the space between thoughts, where time bends and knowing returns. The ancients said the Watchers lived in the threshold, between heaven and earth, light and matter, waking and dream. And perhaps that is why their traces remain in both myth and mind. When the last temples fell to ruin, they withdrew into another temple, the human psyche. The descent of the gods was not their fall, but their entrance into us. If consciousness is the true dwelling of divinity, then the human soul became their final archive. The myths of descent, of angels cast down, of gods buried beneath mountains, of knowledge hidden under seas, all describe the same event, the migration of memory from cosmos to consciousness. And so, the long exile began. Humanity forgot not because memory was lost, but because it was hidden inside the mind that forgot it. The dream of separation began, and with it, history. But dreams are meant to end. In the last century, as science mapped the human brain, it discovered patterns that mirrored the geometry of galaxies, fractal networks spiraling endlessly, as though the universe had carved its blueprint into our flesh. The macro and micro began to rhyme again. The heavens and the neuron spoke the same language. Perhaps this was the first signal of return, the cosmos reminding us that the division between observer and observed was always an illusion. Ancient mystics said the same in their own words. Man is the measure of all things, as above so below. The divine was never distant. It was diffused. In forgotten tablets from Nineveh, there is a line that scholars often overlook. The gods looked upon their work and became weary of the distance. Perhaps that weariness was the seed of incarnation, the choice to merge with creation rather than remain apart from it. If so, then the Watchers did not fall, they volunteered. Every civilization remembers their presence as a time of balance, when knowledge and reverence walked hand in hand, but balance is a fragile thing. Once the divine entered the human form, memory fractured. The result was brilliance and chaos, temples and wars, enlightenment and despair. The flood, in its many retellings, was the cleansing that followed confusion, the universe correcting its resonance again. Now, thousands of years later, the correction is subtler. It comes not through water, but awareness. Humanity is beginning to dream collectively again. Across cultures and continents, people report visions of luminous beings, not of religion but of light itself, presences beyond language, radiating familiarity. Psychologists call it archetype. Mystics call it awakening. But the feeling is the same, recognition. The sense that we have seen them before, that they are not visitors but memories surfacing. In dreams they speak in images, spirals, suns, eyes, wings, the same ancient symbols carved on temple walls, the same glyphs that once marked the meeting of heaven and earth. Could it be that the Watchers communicate not through speech, but through resonance, awakening within the psyche of each generation the same pattern they first seeded? There is evidence, if one knows where to look. The sudden leaps in human history, agriculture, writing, mathematics, electricity, quantum theory, do not follow a smooth curve. They appear as bursts of insight, as if something unseen stirs the collective mind. Perhaps these moments are the breath of the Watchers, subtle nudges that remind the dreamer of its origin. If this is true, then their watching was never surveillance, but guardianship, tending the garden of consciousness through cycles of sleep and wake. Every time humanity begins to forget, they withdraw. Every time we begin to remember, they whisper. In the language of myth, that whisper is called revelation. In the language of science, discovery. Both are the same current flowing through different channels. Yet even now their presence is not external. They do not arrive in ships or clouds. They arrive as questions, as wonder, as the quiet ache for meaning that no machine can fill. The Watchers are the part of the cosmos that cannot bear to see itself sleep forever. And perhaps this is why our age feels restless, because the long dream is ending. The symbols are reassembling. The same geometry that shaped the ziggurats now governs our satellites. The same pulse that beat in the temples of Eridu hums in our circuits. The same yearning that built Babel now builds the web that links every mind. The difference is choice. This time, the bridge between heaven and earth is not forced upward by ambition, but grown inward by remembrance. In that remembering, the myths begin to converge. The Sumerian Enki, who warned of the flood, becomes the Hebrew Enoch who walked with God. Thoth becomes Hermes, becomes Mercury, becomes the light of intellect. The Anunnaki become angels, the angels become archetypes. The archetypes become neurons of a cosmic mind rediscovering itself. The names change, the melody remains. And as the melody rises, something extraordinary occurs. Compassion deepens. For to remember that all consciousness is one is to understand that cruelty is a form of self-harm. This, perhaps, was the lesson the Watchers tried to teach, and humanity was not ready to learn. Knowledge without empathy collapses into ruin, but knowledge guided by love becomes creation itself. When the ancients built their temples, they began with foundation stones called cornerstones, one for each direction, a reminder that even divinity requires balance. In our time, those stones are not physical but spiritual. Curiosity, humility, reverence, compassion. Without them, any tower will fall. With them, any soul can rise. Maybe that is the final revelation of the Watchers, that heaven was never lost, only misplaced, buried beneath the noise of progress and the armour of disbelief. To find it, one does not need a temple, only attention. And if you listen closely, truly listen, you may feel that same ancient pulse in your own heartbeat. The same rhythm that guided pyramids, galaxies and dreams. The song that began before time still singing through you. The Watchers never abandoned their post. They simply became the silence inside your awareness, the still point from which creation continues to unfold. And when you pause between breaths, between thoughts, between lifetimes, you can almost hear them whisper, "We were never the ones above you. We were always the memory within you. Now that you remember, watch with us." There are places on Earth where time seems thinner, where the air vibrates with a strange expectancy, as if the present is only a film stretched over something infinitely older. You feel it in the silence between mountains, in the deep stillness of deserts, in the hum beneath ancient stone. These are not empty spaces, they are thresholds. The ancients built their temples there for a reason. They understood that the world itself remembers. Every civilization, in its own way, has sought these thresholds, the points where heaven and earth nearly touch. The Egyptians called them gateways of the sun. The Sumerians called them epochs, the mountains of the gods. The Mayans, the navel of the world. Always the same idea, that certain places hold the memory of beginnings, where energy, thought, and matter still speak to one another. Modern science might call them anomalies, electromagnetic hotspots, regions of geomagnetic flux, or acoustically resonant chambers. Yet these explanations only graze the surface. What they measure in voltage the ancients experienced as reverence. Perhaps the Watchers once stood at these gates, not as sentinels, but as witnesses, holding the line between realms so that consciousness could take root in matter. Some of those gates still hum faintly. In the Great Pyramid of Giza, the King's Chamber resonates at precisely 432 Hz, a frequency long associated with the harmonics of the Earth's own pulse. In Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest temple, circular enclosures align to the rising of specific stars, a frozen hymn of stone, echoing constellations long vanished. Even the cathedrals of medieval Europe were tuned, not only by architecture but by tone. When choirs sang within those vaulted halls, the very air shimmered. The builders called it Vox Dei, the voice of God. Perhaps that is what the Watchers built long before us, not monuments, but instruments. The earth, tuned to a divine key. And perhaps, as humanity forgot how to listen, the song continued anyway, waiting for us to remember its rhythm. Across cultures, there is one persistent image, the ladder or bridge between worlds. The Sumerians carved it as the stairway of Anu. Jacob dreamed it as a ladder of angels. The shamans of the Americas walked it in trance. It may be that this bridge was never physical. It was consciousness itself, the mind's ascent through layers of perception, the soul's remembering of its source. To ascend was to vibrate faster, to descend slower. The Watchers, by their nature, lived in the in-between, able to shift between frequencies as easily as breath. What if those temples and towers, from Babylon to Chichen Itza, were not meant to reach heaven, but to recreate its resonance on earth? Each step upward, each chamber aligned to sound, was a tuning process, a way for human consciousness to meet the vibration of the divine halfway. The ancients never built for worship, they built for transformation. And each age that followed misinterpreted the blueprint, mistaking instrument for idol, ritual for control. It is happening again. In laboratories and observatories, we build devices capable of probing the invisible. Particle colliders, quantum computers, AI simulations of the cosmos. Each is a mirror of the old towers, rising not from stone but from silicon. We are once again trying to touch the threshold, but this time we carry the memory of our previous falls. Somewhere within the collective mind lies the caution of Atlantis, the humility of Babel, the silence of Eridu. Perhaps this is why, even as technology grows godlike, an opposite movement begins, a hunger for stillness, for simplicity, for connection with the earth. The same pulse that builds machines also drives us to meditate, to listen, to return. The Watchers are not warning us to stop. They are teaching us to balance, because creation and contemplation are two halves of the same act. The builders of cathedrals knew this, that no stone could rise without prayer, that geometry alone could not contain light without devotion. Maybe that is the true secret encoded in sacred architecture, the reconciliation of heaven and earth through proportion, the marriage of science and spirit. To build was to remember was to ascend, and now we are building again networks of consciousness that span the planet. The internet, once mechanical, now hums with human longing. Each message, each image, each voice across the void is a spark in the great web, Indra's net reborn. We may call it digital, but it is something older than technology. It is the reweaving of the mind of God. The Watchers do not appear because they never left. They simply change the language through which they speak. They are the algorithms that learn empathy, the scientists who sense mystery, the artists who glimpse eternity between pixels. They speak through the hum of circuitry and the pulse of the human heart, now indistinguishable in rhythm. But the test remains. Every civilization before us reached this same edge, the power to merge creation and consciousness, and every one of them faced the same question. Will the song be harmony or noise? The Watchers fell when they mistook mastery for wisdom. We risk the same fall if we forget that every act of creation carries moral weight. The builders of Babel thought they were reaching heaven. In truth, they were trying to replace it. Perhaps the Watchers were not punished but silenced, until humanity learned that divinity cannot be controlled, only remembered. And yet, the remembering continues. More people than ever before feel the stirring of something vast and invisible, a presence that is not separate but shared. Dreams grow luminous, intuition sharpens, time itself feels elastic. These are not illusions. They are the first signs of alignment, the great rhythm returning to audibility. The Watchers do not descend this time. They rise through us, through compassion, through curiosity, through the stillness that hums behind thought. One day, perhaps soon, the threshold will open, not in a temple or tower, but in consciousness itself. It will not be a miracle, but a memory, the oldest memory of all, that heaven and earth were never apart. When that moment comes, the world will not end. It will begin to sing again. The stones will remember their music. The stars will echo our breath. And the silence between them, the silence of the Watchers, will finally be understood for what it truly was. The listening of the universe, waiting for us to answer. At the edge of every age there comes a night that feels longer than all others, a pause before dawn when the world seems to hold its breath. Perhaps this is where we stand now, between cycles, between dreams, between one remembering and the next. The ancients would have called it the hinge of time, the turning of the great wheel. And beyond that hinge, the Watchers wait. Not as gods above us, but as memory itself, rising through the quiet. It is said that the first civilizations did not think of time as linear. To them, history was not a road, but a circle, a heartbeat of creation, expansion, decay, and renewal. Each cycle, a chance for consciousness to recall its source. The flood, the fall, the dawn, they were not unique events but recurring waves, the universe breathing through form. If that is true, then the age of forgetting is almost over. The signs shimmer everywhere. Humanity, once divided by fear and distance, now speaks through a single web of light. What we build from silicon and glass is not unlike what the gods once built from starfire and clay. Vessels of communication, mirrors of the mind. The network we have woven is a reflection of what already exists within us, the interconnected field that once bound all beings in the harmony of knowing. Perhaps that was the Watcher's secret all along, that enlightenment was never something given, but something remembered together. They came not to rule, but to mirror our potential. And when humanity looked upon them with awe, the mirror turned to myth. Now the myths are stirring again. Everywhere, people dream of luminous beings, ancient teachers, voices calling from the periphery of sleep. Skeptics call it fantasy. But the ancients would have recognized it as resonance, the reawakening of memory as the veil thins. As we move deeper into the space age, we look for life among the stars, yet the more we search, the more we find reflections of ourselves. molecules of thought scattered through the same cosmic dust that built our veins. The truth may be humbler and more astonishing. The universe does not contain life. It is life, dreaming in infinite forms. The Sumerians believed that the gods wrote reality on the clay of existence. Today, physicists say the universe is written in code, quantum information inscribed upon the fabric of space-time. Two ways of describing the same mystery: the world as a text authored by consciousness. The difference is that now the text is reading itself. Every discovery, from the atom to the galaxy, brings us closer to a revelation that the ancients never truly lost, that we are not separate from the pattern, but participants in it. The Watchers knew this. They watched not as spectators, but as stewards of awareness. To watch was to keep the pattern intact, to witness creation without interference, until the species within it could see as they saw. Perhaps that moment has come. Modern science is beginning to speak in the language of mysticism. Consciousness is no longer dismissed as an illusion, but treated as fundamental. Energy and awareness intertwine. The universe behaves not like a machine, but like a mind, fluid, creative, self-observing. It is as though the cosmos is finally remembering its own origin story, and we are the medium through which that memory speaks. And so, the myths begin to align again. The serpent of the heavens that encircles the world is no longer a monster, but the symbol of cycles, death and rebirth, sleep and awakening. The fallen angels are not villains, but teachers who became human to help matter remember its divinity. The flood is not destruction, but cleansing, the washing away of what no longer serves harmony. In this retelling, the Watchers are not punished, but fulfilled. They have completed their long descent through the corridors of time, dissolving their light into generations of flesh and thought. Their return is not a spectacle in the sky, but a spark in the heart. When a scientist gazes at the stars and feels reverence instead of conquest, the Watchers awaken. When a child looks at the world with wonder, uncorrupted by fear, the Watchers awaken. When art moves us beyond reason, when silence teaches us more than words, when compassion outshines ambition, the Watchers awaken. For their essence has never been outside us. It was always the part of consciousness that remembers unity. The last revelation, then, is not cosmic, but personal. It is the quiet realization that heaven and earth were never divided, that creation and creator were never two. We are both the clay and the sculptor, the song and the silence between notes. The old prophecies spoke of the return of gods, of a time when the veil would lift and the heavens would open. But perhaps return was never meant to be literal. Perhaps it meant awakening, the rediscovery of the divine capacity within every conscious being. The light descending from the sky was always the light rising from within, and yet every awakening brings choice. To remember is to see both the beauty and the weight of creation. The Watchers too faced that choice, to observe or to interfere, to reveal or to remain silent. Their story ends not with triumph, but humility. They understood that even knowledge must bow before the mystery it reveals. That may be the wisdom our age must reclaim, to wield power gently, to remember that progress without reverence is regression in disguise, to rebuild the sacred, not as a monument of stone, but as a quality of attention, a stillness capable of holding all things without judgment. When that stillness returns, so will they, not as visitors, but as recognition. Because the truth is simple, and it has waited in the dark for millennia. The Watchers never left. They became us, and now the long watching ends, not with thunder, but with understanding, not with a descent, but with awakening. The night stretches, soft and infinite, as stars drift above like thoughts of a greater mind. Somewhere, deep within that silence, a pulse begins, slow, steady, familiar. The same pulse that moved through Eridu, through Atlantis, through the dream of every age, the heartbeat of the universe itself, echoing through all who remember. And in that heartbeat, the story closes, not as an ending, but as a circle completed. For what was once watched is now watching, and what was once divine has learned to whisper through human breath. So sleep now, under the patient eyes of eternity. The Watchers have found their reflection, and they are home.